The champagne glass shattered against marble, crystal shards glittering like broken promises across Italian stone. Serena Vale stood in her wedding dress, skin crawling beneath $10,000 of silk, staring at the man who'd just bought her like livestock at auction. Lucien Moretti didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just watched her with those slate-gray eyes that had witnessed God knows what kind of violence. "You have 1 year to give me an heir," he said, voice flat as contract language. "Or both our families lose everything." She wanted to scream, to run, but the chapel doors had already locked behind her and 20 armed men stood between her and freedom. If you want to see how far Serena's nightmare takes her, how a woman with nothing left to lose becomes the one thing a monster never expected, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The stained glass threw colored light across Serena's face like bruises she hadn't earned yet. Purple along her cheekbone, blue across her throat, red pooling in the hollow above her collarbone where her pulse hammered against skin too thin to hide fear. She stood at the altar, if you could call it that, in a private chapel that smelled like old money and older sins, wearing a dress her father had chosen because it photographed well for the society pages he'd never be able to afford again. Lucien Moretti waited across from her with the patience of a man who'd learned early that everything had a price and everyone eventually paid it. He wore black, not the romantic kind, the kind undertakers wore, the kind men wore when they understood ceremonies were just theater for people who still believed in happy endings. Serena had stopped believing in happy endings around the same time her father's creditors started calling at 3 a.m. The officiant spoke in Italian, words that meant nothing to her except that they were legally binding and irreversible. She caught fragments: contratto matrimoniale, marriage contract, obblighi finanziari, financial obligations. Nothing about love, nothing about choice. Just the cold mechanical language of transactions between men who traded daughters like stock portfolios. Her father stood at the front row, sweating through his rented tuxedo, refusing to meet her eyes. Couldn't even look at what he'd done, what he'd sold. The great Richard Vale, real estate developer, philanthropist, collector of vintage cars and younger wives, reduced to peddling his only daughter to a criminal organization because he'd gambled with money that wasn't his and lost spectacularly. Serena had found the contracts 3 weeks ago, had broken into his office after midnight, and read every page of the deal he'd made with the Moretti family. 7 million euros in debt forgiveness, complete protection from the Eastern European syndicates he owed, a seat on the board of Moretti Holdings, and all it cost him was her. She'd considered running, had actually packed a bag, and made it as far as the Milan train station before 2 men in expensive suits intercepted her at the platform. They didn't threaten, didn't need to. Just showed her photographs of her younger sister, Elena, 17, still in boarding school in Switzerland, walking to class, sitting in a cafe, laughing with friends who had no idea her family was collapsing. The message was clear: run, and Elena pays the price. So Serena had unpacked her bag and put on the wedding dress and learned what it felt like to be livestock. "The rings," the officiant said in accented English, nodding toward a velvet cushion held by a man whose neck was wider than Serena's thigh. Lucien took the platinum band first, slid it onto her finger without ceremony or tenderness, just cold metal against cold skin. His hands didn't shake, didn't hesitate. He'd done this before, Serena realized. Not marriage necessarily, but transactions, acquisitions, hostile takeovers of assets that used to be human beings. Her turn. She lifted the matching band with fingers that trembled despite every effort to stay composed. Hated herself for shaking, hated him for noticing. When she slid the ring onto his hand, their eyes met for the first time since the ceremony began. Up close, Lucien Moretti looked older than his 32 years. Not physically. His face still had that sharp, aristocratic bone structure that appeared on magazine covers next to articles about Europe's most eligible bachelors. But his eyes. God, his eyes. They belonged to someone who'd already died once and was just walking through the motions of living. "By the power vested in me," the officiant continued, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." No one cheered. No one threw rice or flower petals or any of the sentimental garbage that usually accompanied weddings. The 50 guests in attendance, politicians, lawyers, bankers, Men whose legitimate businesses barely concealed their illegitimate empires simply stood. As Lucien took Serena's arm and walked her down the aisle like a prisoner being transferred between facilities, the photographer captured it all: the perfect society wedding, the blushing bride, the handsome groom. No one would ever know she'd been crying for 3 days straight. No one would ever see the bruises on her father's face from when he'd tried to back out of the deal last week and learned exactly how binding a Moretti contract really was. Outside, the Italian coast stretched beneath a sky too beautiful for what was happening. The chapel sat on a cliff overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, all that postcard-perfect Mediterranean blue that tourists paid thousands of euros to photograph. Serena had always wanted to visit Italy, had imagined herself backpacking through Tuscany after college, drinking cheap wine in ancient piazzas, falling in love with some charming stranger who spoke broken English and kissed like he meant it. Instead, she'd gotten Lucien Moretti and a marriage that felt like a death sentence with better catering. A black sedan waited at the bottom of the chapel steps. Not a limousine, not some romantic vintage car. Just an armored Mercedes with bulletproof glass and a driver who carried a gun under his jacket. Lucien opened the door himself, gesturing for her to enter. At least he had manners. Cold comfort when your husband looked at you like an investment he wasn't sure would generate adequate returns. The door closed, sealed them inside together. The driver pulled away from the chapel without waiting for instructions, heading south toward Sicily and the estate where Serena would apparently spend the rest of her life, or at least the next year. Maybe less if things went badly. She'd read enough about the Moretti family to know that wives who disappointed tended to disappear quietly. Tragic accidents, early onset illnesses, deaths that raised questions no one in power cared to answer. They drove in silence for 20 minutes. Serena watched the coastline blur past, trying to memorize escape routes she'd never be able to use. Lucien stared straight ahead, jaw tight, one hand resting on his knee in a posture so controlled it had to be painful. Finally, he spoke. "You can cry if you need to. I won't judge you for it." "Go to hell." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, more broken. Lucien's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost relieved, like her anger was more honest than the silence. "That's fair," he said quietly, "but we should establish some ground rules before we arrive at the estate." "Ground rules?" Serena laughed, but it came out all wrong, strangled, desperate. "We just got married, and you're already talking like a prison warden." "Because that's what this is." Lucien turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw something almost human in his eyes. Not kindness, not sympathy, just exhaustion. "Your father owes my family money he can never repay. My family needs legitimacy they can't buy. This marriage solves both problems. I don't expect you to like it. I don't like it either. But if we're going to survive the next year, we need to be honest about what this is." "And what is it exactly?" "A contract, with very specific terms." Serena's stomach dropped. She'd known there would be conditions, had prepared herself for whatever humiliation her father had agreed to. But the way Lucien spoke, that clinical detachment, made her skin crawl. "What terms?" Lucien reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder. Unfolded documents that had been prepared by lawyers who charged more per hour than most people earned in a month. He handed them to her without ceremony. "You have 1 year to produce an heir, a biological child carrying Moretti blood. If you fulfill this obligation, your father's debts are forgiven permanently, and you receive a financial settlement that will ensure your independence for life. If you fail, let me guess, everyone loses everything." "Not everyone." Lucien's voice dropped lower, colder. "Your father's debts transfer to you, and my uncle Raphael, who currently controls the family's more traditional business interests, takes control of my holdings, which means the legitimate empire I've spent the last decade building reverts back to what it was before. Gun running, human trafficking, political assassinations, the kind of darkness that turns cities into graveyards." Serena stared at the documents, at the clauses written in legal language designed to obscure the fact that she'd just been purchased like breeding stock. 1 year. 12 months to get pregnant and deliver a child to a man she'd met exactly twice before today. A man whose family tree was fertilized with blood and watered with violence. And if I refuse, then Elena's tuition at that expensive Swiss boarding school becomes unaffordable. And your father, who who currently enjoys the protection of Moretti lawyers and security personnel, finds himself very suddenly exposed to the people he borrowed from in Prague and Moscow. Men who don't write contracts. They write obituaries. The threat was delivered without emotion, without cruelty, just fact. Serena wanted to scream, wanted to claw at his face until that perfect aristocratic bone structure collapsed into something honest. But she'd read enough about Lucien Moretti to know that violence wouldn't move him. Nothing moved him. He'd watched his own father execute enemies in front of him when he was 16. Had inherited an empire built on fear before he was old enough to legally drink. Emotional appeals meant nothing to a man who'd been trained since childhood to view people as assets or liabilities. "You're a monster," she whispered. "Yes." Lucien folded the documents and returned them to his jacket. "But I'm the monster keeping your family alive. Remember that when you hate me, which you will, often." The sedan climbed into the hills above the coast. Pine trees replaced beach grass. Ancient stone walls marked property lines that had been defended with blood for centuries. The Moretti estate appeared gradually. First the gates, then the walls. Finally the main house rising above manicured gardens, like something out of a historical drama about families who valued legacy more than humanity. Serena had seen photographs during her desperate research, had tried to prepare herself for the reality of living inside a fortress designed to keep the world out and prisoners in. But photographs didn't capture the scale, the isolation, the way the estate seemed to exist outside normal geography, outside normal time, in some dark corner of history where feudal lords still ruled and women still belonged to their husbands like furniture. The car stopped in a circular driveway paved with stones older than her father's family name. Lucien exited first, then held the door for her with the same mechanical courtesy he'd shown at the chapel. Serena stepped out into Italian sunshine that felt wrong, too bright, too warm, like the weather hadn't gotten the memo that someone had just been sold into legalized captivity. A woman waited at the entrance, late 50s, severe gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, wearing black like she was mourning something that hadn't died yet. She nodded at Lucien with the familiarity of long service, then turned to Serena with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and utterly uncompromising. "Welcome, Signora Moretti. I am Caterina. I manage the household. If you need anything, you ask me. If you have questions, you ask me. If you want to leave the estate, you ask me." She paused. "Though I should mention that particular request is rarely approved." "Rarely. Not never." "Never," Lucien corrected, voice flat. "The estate is under constant security surveillance. Armed guards patrol the perimeter. Electronic monitoring covers every entrance and exit. You're not a prisoner, Serena, but you're not free either. The sooner you accept that, the easier this year will be." He walked inside without waiting for her response, just disappeared into the shadows of the entryway like he'd never been there at all. Caterina watched him go with an expression Serena couldn't read, then gestured toward the door. "Come. I will show you to your rooms. Dinner is served at 8. The dress code is formal. Lucien does not tolerate lateness. My rooms, plural. Of course, you and Lucien maintain separate quarters. He has his wing, you have yours. This is a marriage of contracts, Signora, not romance. Thank God for small mercies. At least she wouldn't have to share a bed with the man who'd just purchased her reproductive system." Serena followed Caterina through halls that smelled like old wood and older money, past paintings of dead Morettis whose eyes seemed to follow her with judgment and contempt, past windows that overlooked gardens so perfect they looked artificial, past doors that were closed and locked and probably hiding the kind of secrets that required armed guards and non-disclosure agreements. Her rooms occupied the entire third floor of the east wing. Bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom with a tub large enough to drown in. Walk-in closet already filled with clothes she'd never chosen. Designer labels in her exact size, arranged by color and season like she was a doll being dressed by someone else's imagination. "Your personal items from your father's house will arrive tomorrow," Caterina explained, "though I suspect you will find everything you need already here. Lucien was very specific about your comfort." "How thoughtful. He buys me like cattle but makes sure the cage is well furnished." Caterina's expression softened slightly, almost pitying. "I have worked for the Moretti family for 30 years, Signora. I have seen many women enter this house, some with love, some with ambition, some, like you, with no choice at all. I will not insult you with false comfort. This life is not easy. Lucien is not easy. But he is not his father. Remember that when the darkness comes, because it will come. It always does with this family. She left before Serena could ask what that meant. Left her standing in a bedroom that cost more than most people's houses, wearing a wedding dress that felt like a shroud, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror and barely recognizing the woman looking back. 24 hours ago, she'd been Serena Vale, college graduate, aspiring journalist, daughter of a man whose worst crime she'd thought was infidelity and a fondness for expensive wine. Now she was Serena Moretti, property of a criminal empire, breeding stock for a family that valued legacy more than love, a living incubator with a 12-month deadline. She tore off the wedding dress, didn't bother being careful, just ripped at lace and silk until it pooled around her feet like shed skin, stood there in her underwear, shaking with rage and fear, and something darker she didn't want to name. Then she walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower as hot as it would go, stood under scalding water until her skin turned red, until she couldn't tell the difference between water and tears. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that cost more than her college textbooks, she found a note had been slipped under her door. Expensive paper. Masculine handwriting. Just 3 sentences. Dinner at 8. East Terrace. Wear something you can actually breathe in. You look like you're suffocating. Serena crumpled the note in her fist. Lucien Moretti was observant. Dangerous combination in a man who already held too much power. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to lock herself in her golden cage and starve rather than play the obedient wife. But survival meant choosing her battles, and tonight wasn't the hill to die on. She went to the closet, found a simple black dress that was beautiful without being seductive, elegant without trying too hard. The kind of thing a woman wore when she wanted to be taken seriously instead of objectified. Paired it with flat shoes. She'd be damned if she'd hobble around in heels for his benefit, and minimal jewelry. No makeup, no perfume, just her face, still red and raw from crying in the shower. At 7:55, she made her way downstairs. The estate had a different quality at night. Less museum, more mausoleum, shadows gathered in corners. The dead Morettis in their paintings seemed to watch with greater intensity. Serena wondered how many of them had died peacefully. Probably none. The East Terrace overlooked the sea. Moonlight turned the water silver. A table had been set for 2. White linens, crystal glasses, candles that flickered in the Mediterranean breeze. Lucien stood at the stone railing, still wearing his wedding suit, staring at the horizon like he could see something out there that no one else could. He didn't turn when she approached, didn't acknowledge her presence at all until she was standing directly beside him. "You came." He sounded surprised, almost relieved. "You gave me an order. I'm property now. Property obeys." "Don't!" The word came out harsh. Lucien finally turned to face her, and in the candlelight she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. "Don't reduce yourself to that. Not for me. Not for anyone." "Then what should I call myself? Your wife. We both know that's a lie. Your business partner? I didn't negotiate this deal. Your prisoner? Getting warmer." Lucien closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. Not quite human, not quite vulnerable, but closer than she'd seen before. "Call yourself a survivor, because that's what you're going to have to be." He pulled out a chair for her, waited until she sat before taking his own seat across the table. A staff member appeared from nowhere, silent, efficient, the kind of invisible service that only existed in houses where people had money older than democracy. Wine was poured, appetizers were served, all of it performed with such precision that Serena wanted to scream just to shatter the choreography. "Do they always move like ghosts?" she asked, watching the server disappear back into the house. "I pay them to be invisible. Discretion is expensive, but necessary in this life." "This life? You mean crime?" "I mean survival in a world where the difference between legal and illegal is determined by who writes the laws." Lucien lifted his wine glass but didn't drink, just studied the dark red liquid like it held answers he'd been searching for. "My grandfather built this empire on violence. My father expanded it with more violence. I've spent the last decade trying to transform it into something legitimate. Real estate, technology investments, renewable energy, businesses that don't require bodies in the foundation." How noble. A criminal with a conscience. A criminal with ambition. There's a difference. He finally drank, set the glass down with careful control. My uncle Raphael represents the old guard. He wants to return to traditional operations, drugs, guns, human cargo. He believes I've made the family weak by pursuing legitimacy. This marriage, this heir requirement, was his compromise. Prove the Moretti line continues, or he takes control and undoes everything I've built. Serena leaned back in her chair, processing. So you need me to have a baby to prevent your uncle from turning you into a gun runner? Essentially, yes. And what happens to me after I fulfill my contractual obligation? Lucien's jaw tightened. You receive your settlement, financial independence, legal separation if you choose it. You're free to leave. Just like that. Pop out an heir and walk away. That was the arrangement. Was. Serena caught the past tense. What changed? Lucien stared at her across the candlelight. For a long moment he didn't speak. The Mediterranean breeze carried salt and pine. Somewhere in the gardens below, water fountains performed their endless shunhuan. Finally, he said something that sounded almost honest. I thought I could do this clinically. Arrange a transaction, fulfill the terms, maintain emotional distance. But then I saw you at the chapel, standing in that dress you clearly hated, trying not to cry in front of strangers, and I realized I'd become exactly what I've spent years trying to escape. My father, my grandfather, men who treated people like assets to be acquired and disposed of. He paused. I don't know how to apologize for that. I'm not sure apologies even matter at this point. But you should know that I didn't want this. Any of this. Then why go through with it? Because the alternative is worse. My uncle controls the violent faction of our organization. If I don't produce an heir, he doesn't just take control of the business. He takes control of the family. And that means my younger sister, Julia, who's currently studying architecture in Rome and has no idea what her last name really means, becomes his next bargaining chip. Another woman sold to consolidate power. I couldn't let that happen, even if it meant doing the same thing to you. Serena absorbed this, tried to find the lie, the manipulation. But Lucien's exhaustion looked too real, too bone deep. He wasn't performing, he was confessing, and that somehow made everything worse, because it's easier to hate a monster than a man who knows he's become one and did it anyway. Your sister, how old? 23. Brilliant, idealistic. Everything this family isn't. Lucien smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She thinks I'm a venture capitalist, that the family money comes from legitimate investments and smart financial planning. I've worked very hard to keep her innocent, to give her the childhood I never had. But if Raphael takes control, that innocence ends. He'll use her the way he wanted to use you, the way this family has been using women for generations. So you sacrificed me to save her. Yes. No hesitation, no apology, just fact. Serena should have been furious, should have thrown wine in his face and stormed back to her gilded prison, but instead she felt something unexpected, understanding, not forgiveness, not even sympathy, just the cold recognition that they were both trapped in a system bigger than either of them, both trying to protect people they loved, both failing in different ways. I had a sister too, she said quietly. Have? Elena, 17. She's at boarding school in Switzerland, completely oblivious to the fact that our father sold me to keep her safe. Your people made sure I understood what would happen to her if I refused this arrangement. Lucien's expression darkened. That wasn't my order. Does it matter whose order it was? The threat worked. I'm here. Elena's safe. Everyone wins except me. And me. Lucien leaned forward. I know you don't believe this. I know you have no reason to trust anything I say. But I need you to understand something, Serena. This marriage may have started as a transaction, but I don't want to treat you like property. I don't want to force you into anything. I don't want to become my father. Then what do you want? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the staff member returned to clear the appetizer plates and serve the main course, something elaborate that Serena couldn't have named if her life depended on it. Only after they were alone again did Lucien answer. I want to survive this year without destroying what's left of my humanity, and I want you to survive it without losing yours. He met her eyes across the table. I know that's not enough. I know you deserved better than this, better than me, but it's all I can offer right now. Serena picked up her fork, pushed food around her plate without eating. You know what the worst part is? I actually believe you. You're not lying. You're not manipulating. You're just a man who made a terrible choice and has to live with it. That almost makes it worse. Why? Because it means there's no villain to fight, no monster to defeat. Just two people trapped in a nightmare neither of them wanted, trying not to drown. She finally took a bite, swallowed without tasting. That's the kind of tragedy that doesn't have a happy ending. They finished dinner in silence. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like tired. The silence of two people who'd already said everything that mattered and now had to figure out how to exist in the aftermath. When the dessert plates were cleared and the staff had retreated to wherever invisible servants went when they weren't needed, Lucien stood. I'll have Katerina show you the estate tomorrow. The library, the gardens, the screening room. You're not a prisoner, even if it feels that way. You have access to everything except the West Wing. That's where I keep the parts of my life you shouldn't have to see. And if I want to see them anyway, then you're more curious than careful, which might actually serve you well here. He paused at the edge of the terrace. One more thing. The doctor will visit next week. Standard medical consultation. Testing to ensure there are no complications that would prevent conception. I know it's invasive, degrading, but it's part of the contract. Of course it is. Breeding stock needs to be certified healthy. Lucien flinched, actually flinched, like her words had found something in him that still felt pain. I'll have the appointment scheduled for times when I'm away from the estate. You won't have to see me more than necessary. He left before she could respond, disappeared into the house with the same ghost-like quality as his staff. Serena sat alone on the terrace, listening to waves crash against rocks 200 feet below, and wondered if there was any way to survive a year of this without losing her mind. The answer, she suspected, was no. But she'd survived everything else life had thrown at her. Poverty masquerading as middle-class respectability. A father who valued reputation more than integrity. The slow realization that she'd been born into a family that saw daughters as currency instead of people. She'd survived all of that. She could survive Lucien Moretti. Or at least she could try. Serena made her way back to her rooms, changed into pajamas that had been provided by someone who knew her size but nothing about her taste, crawled into a bed that cost more than her education, stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what freedom felt like. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, she dreamed of locked doors and contracts written in blood and a man with gray eyes who looked at her like she was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. She dreamed of escape routes that led nowhere, of her sister standing at the edge of a cliff, smiling, unaware of the drop, of her own reflection growing fainter day by day until she couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. She woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of someone screaming, shot upright in bed, heart hammering, before realizing the screams were coming from somewhere else in the house, the West Wing. Lucien Moretti's wing. She'd been specifically told not to go there, told it contained things she shouldn't see. Serena lay back down, pulled the covers over her head, tried to block out the sound of whatever nightmare was unfolding in the forbidden part of the house. But the screaming continued, not pain exactly, more like rage, like someone fighting demons that couldn't be killed. She lasted 5 minutes before throwing off the covers and heading into the hallway. The estate was different at night, darker, more honest. The dead Morettis in their paintings looked less like ancestors and more like warnings. Serena followed the sound through corridors she hadn't explored, past rooms that remained locked even during daylight, toward the West Wing that Lucien had specifically forbidden. The screaming stopped just as she reached the dividing door, sudden silence that felt worse than noise. She stood there, hand raised to knock, heart pounding in her throat. Before she could decide whether to retreat or proceed, the door opened from the inside. Lucien stood in the doorway wearing only pajama pants, chest bare, skin slick with sweat. His eyes were wild, unfocused, like he just climbed out of hell and hadn't quite made it back to the living world yet. When he saw her, something in his expression cracked. "You shouldn't be here. I heard screaming." Nightmares, they happen sometimes. He tried to close the door. Serena caught it with her hand. Sometimes. That's what Katerina said too. The darkness comes. It always does with this family. What did she mean? Nothing you need to carry. Lucien's voice was raw, damaged. Go back to your room, Serena, please. But she'd already seen past him, into a bedroom that looked less like living quarters and more like a battlefield. furniture overturned, sheets torn, and on the wall above the bed, illuminated by moonlight filtering through windows he'd forgotten to close, photographs. Dozens of them. Crime scene photos. Bodies. Violence captured in stark black and white. Men with their faces blown off. Women with their throats cut. Children. Serena's stomach turned. She looked away. Looked back at Lucien, who was watching her with the expression of someone waiting for judgment he knew he deserved. "What is this?" "Insurance," he said quietly. "Reminders of what my family built, what they're capable of, what I'll become if I forget why I'm trying to change things." He leaned against the doorframe like standing had become too difficult. "I keep them where I sleep, so I can't pretend. Can't lie to myself about what the Moretti name really means." "That's insane. That's survival." Lucien smiled, but it looked like broken glass. "You asked earlier what I want. I'll tell you the truth now. I want to forget what those photographs represent. I want to sleep through one night without seeing my father execute a man in front of me. I want to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. But wanting doesn't change reality. And reality is that I'm the son of a monster, heir to an empire built on corpses, trying to become something different while using the same tactics that created the nightmare in the first place." He closed the door before she could respond, left her standing in the hallway, shaking, trying to process what she'd just seen. The photographs. The screaming. The raw, broken thing Lucien had become when he thought no one was watching. Serena returned to her room. Didn't sleep. Just lay in bed watching the sun slowly rise over the Italian coast, illuminating a world that looked beautiful from a distance and monstrous up close. Exactly like the man she'd married. And somewhere in the hours between midnight and dawn, she made a decision. If she was going to survive this year, she couldn't just endure. Couldn't just play the obedient wife and count down days until her contractual obligation was fulfilled. She needed to understand. Needed to see the whole truth of what she'd been sold into. Because the only way to escape a prison was to first understand how it was built, even if that meant descending into the darkness with him. The morning came whether Serena wanted it or not. Light crawled through the windows of her bedroom like something invasive, exposing every corner she'd hoped darkness would hide. She hadn't slept. Hadn't even tried after what she'd seen in Lucien's room. Those photographs, those bodies, the evidence of what his family had built, plastered on the walls where he slept like some kind of self-inflicted penance. She dragged herself out of bed around 7, muscles aching like she'd been fighting all night. In a way, she had been. Fighting the urge to run, fighting the realization that there was nowhere to run to, fighting the horrible understanding that Lucien Moretti wasn't just a monster. He was a man trying desperately not to become one, and somehow that made everything worse. Caterina knocked precisely at 8 with a breakfast tray Serena hadn't requested. The older woman's face gave nothing away as she set down silver-covered dishes on the sitting room table, but her eyes lingered on Serena's face, taking inventory of the sleeplessness, the red-rimmed eyes, the exhaustion that went deeper than one bad night. "Lucien asked me to inform you he'll be in Milan for the next 3 days, Caterina said, pouring coffee with the mechanical precision of someone who'd performed this ritual 10,000 times. "Business that requires his personal attention. You're free to explore the estate in his absence, the library, the gardens, the pool, everything except the West Wing, which remains off limits." "What if I've already been there?" Caterina's hand paused mid-pour, just for a second, then continued as if nothing had happened. "Then you've seen more than you should have, and you'll have questions I'm not authorized to answer." "Who is authorized?" "No one. Some truths don't have handlers, Signora. They just exist, and you either learn to live with them, or they consume you." She finished pouring, set the pot down with a soft clink of silver against silver. "Lucien instructed me to arrange a doctor's appointment for you. Next Tuesday. Standard medical examination to ensure there are no complications that would prevent conception. The clinical language, the matter-of-fact delivery, like they were discussing a business merger instead of reducing Serena to breeding stock. She wanted to throw the coffee pot at the wall, wanted to scream until the dead Morettis in their paintings shattered from the sound. Instead, she took a breath and forced her voice steady. "And if there are complications, then the contract becomes void, and your father's debts transfer immediately." Caterina's expression softened slightly. I've seen many women sit where you're sitting, Signora. Some accepted their fate quietly. Some fought every day until the fight destroyed them. The ones who survived truly survived, not just existed. They learned to find power in small things, a locked door they controlled, a garden they made their own, pieces of themselves the family couldn't touch. I suggest you find yours before the year takes them all. She left before Serena could ask what pieces she'd lost during her 30 years serving the Moretti family. The breakfast sat untouched. Serena couldn't stomach food, could barely stomach breathing. She dressed in jeans and a t-shirt from the closet full of clothes she hadn't chosen, then made her way downstairs with no particular destination in mind. Just movement. Just proof she could still make decisions, even if they were meaningless ones. The library occupied the entire ground floor of the south wing. Serena found it by accident, following hallways that seemed to shift and reorganize themselves when she wasn't paying attention. The doors were unlocked, heavy oak that swung open silently on hinges oiled by people paid to make everything effortless. Books lined the walls floor to ceiling. First editions. Rare manuscripts. Collections that belonged in museums instead of private homes. Serena ran her fingers along leather spines, trying to find comfort in the smell of old paper and older ink. Her father had owned books once, before the gambling debts, before the creditors, before he'd sold everything valuable, including his daughters. She pulled down a volume at random, Italian poetry, the kind professors assigned in undergraduate lit classes to students who thought romance was dead and needed proof it had once existed. She couldn't read Italian, couldn't understand the words on the page, but the rhythm felt familiar, longing translated across any language. Neruda, Chilean, not Italian, but Lucien never cared much for geographical accuracy in his collecting. Serena spun around. A man stood in the library doorway, early 60s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that cost more than most cars. His smile was warm. Too warm. The kind of warmth that felt calculated, weaponized. "I'm sorry," Serena said, closing the book. "I didn't realize anyone else was here. My fault entirely. I have a terrible habit of appearing without warning." He crossed the room with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked these halls for decades. Extended a hand. "Raphael Moretti, Lucien's uncle, which makes me your uncle by marriage, though that particular relationship feels too formal for the circumstances." Serena shook his hand because refusing would have been an insult she couldn't afford. His grip was firm, practiced. The handshake of a man who'd closed deals that left bodies in their wake. She'd read about Raphael during her desperate research. He controlled the violent faction of the Moretti organization, the part Lucien was trying to dismantle, the darkness pushing back against the light. Serena Vale, though I suppose it's Moretti now. Serena Moretti. Raphael tested the name like he was tasting wine. It has a nice ring to it, better than some of the names that have occupied this house over the years. My nephew chose well. Beautiful, intelligent, and if the reports are accurate, remarkably resilient given the circumstances of your arrangement. You mean being sold like livestock to settle my father's debts? I mean accepting reality with grace instead of fighting battles you can't win. Raphael's smile never wavered. So many brides enter this family with romantic delusions, love, partnership, equality. They last maybe 6 months before the truth breaks them. But you understood the transaction from the beginning. That's rare, valuable. Serena set the poetry book back on the shelf, turned to face Raphael fully. "If you're here to threaten me, you're wasting your time. Lucien already made the terms very clear, 1 year, 1 heir, or everyone loses. I'm not here to threaten you, Kara. I'm here to offer you an alternative." "I'm listening." Raphael moved to the window overlooking the gardens. Sunlight caught the silver in his hair, making him look almost angelic. Almost. "My nephew believes he can transform this family into something legitimate. Corporations, legal enterprises, respectability purchased through quarterly earnings and charitable donations. It's a beautiful fantasy, but fantasy doesn't survive contact with reality. The Moretti family built its fortune on violence and fear. That foundation doesn't disappear because Lucien wants to play venture capitalist. So you want to drag him back into the darkness. I want to preserve what our family spent generations building. Lucien sees our traditional operations as barbaric. I see them as necessary. The world runs on violence, Serena. Always has. Always will. The only question is whether you're the one wielding it or suffering from it. Serena crossed her arms. And what does this have to do with me? Everything. Raffaele turned from the window. His eyes were different from Lucien's, darker, emptier, like looking into a well that had never held water. The contract requires an heir within 1 year, but it doesn't specify that the heir must be Lucien's biological child, only that it carries Moretti blood and legal legitimacy. The implication hit her like cold water. Serena took a step back. I'm suggesting you have options. Lucien believes he has you trapped, that your father's debts and your sister's safety give him absolute control. But contracts can be renegotiated, alliances can shift. If you were to become my ally instead of his wife, I could offer you something Lucien never will. Which is freedom. Real freedom. Not the conditional release he's dangling at the end of 12 months. I'm talking about immediate financial independence. Your father's debts forgiven without the breeding requirement. Your sister protected under my personal guarantee. All you have to do is fail to produce an heir. 12 months from now, when the contract expires unfulfilled, control of the family reverts to me. Lucien loses his legitimacy project. You gain your life back. Everyone wins. Except Lucien. Except Lucien, Raphael agreed. But tell me honestly, do you owe him loyalty? He purchased you like property, reduced you to an incubator for his genetic legacy. Why protect a man who views you as a transaction? Serena's mind raced. The offer was tempting, terrifyingly tempting. 1 year of simply not getting pregnant, and she'd walk away with everything she needed to rebuild her life. Her father's debts erased. Elena safe. Freedom from this gilded prison and the man who'd locked her inside it. But something felt wrong. The way Raffaele watched her. Like a predator assessing prey. Like someone who'd made this exact offer to other women and knew precisely which pressure points to manipulate. What happens to Lucien if you take control? He remains family, remains wealthy. He simply steps back from leadership and allows those with experience to guide the organization back to profitability. You didn't answer the question. What happens to him? Raphael's smile thinned. My nephew has made enemies during his decade-long crusade for legitimacy. Enemies who remember when the Moretti name meant something to fear. If I resume control, there may be old debts that require payment, but that's family business. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Old debts, you mean executions. I mean consequences for decisions that weakened our position in the market. Raphael crossed back toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Think about my offer, Serena. You have 11.5 months to decide, but understand this. Lucien is not your savior. He's your captor. The difference between him and me is that I'm honest about what I want. He hides his violence behind corporate letterhead and pretends that makes him civilized. But we both know the truth. Monsters don't stop being monsters just because they change their wardrobe. Why she gets side He left her standing in the library, surrounded by books full of dead languages and dead poets, trying to process what had just happened. Raphael had offered her an escape route, a way out that didn't require submitting to Lucien's breeding contract. All she had to do was nothing, just survive 12 months without getting pregnant, and freedom would be hers. But at what cost? Lucien's life, probably. His sister's safety, definitely. The destruction of whatever progress he'd made transforming the family business from criminal empire to legitimate corporation. And for what? So Raffaele could resurrect the violence and fear that had built the Moretti fortune in the first place. Serena sat down heavily in a leather chair that had probably witnessed 100 years of family drama. Her father had sold her to save himself. Lucien had purchased her to save his sister and his legacy. Now Raphael was offering to buy her loyalty with promises he probably had no intention of keeping. Everyone wanted something from her. Everyone saw her as currency. The only difference was the price they were willing to pay. She needed to think. Needed space to process without stone walls and dead ancestors pressing in from all sides. The gardens. Katerina had said she could explore the gardens. Fresh air might help, might give her enough distance to see the trap before she stepped into it. The estate's gardens sprawled across 10 acres of manicured perfection. Serena followed gravel paths between rose bushes and flowering trees, imported from places she'd probably never visit. Fountains performed their endless cycles. Statues of forgotten saints stood guard over flower beds arranged in geometric precision. Everything beautiful, everything controlled, everything designed to look natural while being completely artificial. She found a bench near the southern wall overlooking the cliff edge and the sea beyond. Sat down, tried to breathe, tried to remember what it felt like to make choices that weren't between bad and worse. The Mediterranean stretched to the horizon, blue and infinite and completely indifferent to human suffering. She'd always found that comforting somehow. The ocean didn't care about debts or contracts or family legacies. It just existed, swallowing everything eventually. "You look like you're planning an escape route." Serena didn't jump, didn't turn around, just closed her eyes and waited for whoever had followed her to reveal themselves. Footsteps on gravel, the rustle of expensive fabric, then a woman's voice, younger than Katerina's, carrying an accent that sounded more Roman than Sicilian. "I'm Julia, Lucien's sister. You must be the bride he's been hiding." Serena opened her eyes, turned. The woman standing beside the bench looked nothing like Lucien. Where he was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, Julia Moretti was soft curves and open expressions. Early 20s, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer armor. She smiled like someone who still believed the world was fundamentally good. "Serena, and I'm not being hidden. I'm being—" She stopped. Wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. "I'm adjusting. To being married to my brother the robot." Julia sat down uninvited. "Yeah, I can imagine that's an adjustment. Lucien has all the emotional warmth of a tax attorney. No offense." "None taken. It's accurate. He wasn't always like that, you know. When we were kids, before our father died, he used to laugh. Actually laugh. Not the fake corporate thing he does now when he's pretending to be human. Real laughter that made his whole face change." Julia picked at the edge of her sweater. "Then Papa died and Lucien inherited the business, and something in him just shut down. Like he decided emotions were liabilities and cut them out." Serena studied Julia carefully. Lucien had said his sister was innocent, sheltered, protected from the truth of what the Moretti name represented. Looking at her now, Serena believed it. Julia had the kind of naivety that only survived in people who'd never witnessed real darkness. "What did Lucien tell you about me?" "That he was getting married for business reasons and I shouldn't read too much into it. Very romantic." Julia rolled her eyes. "But I looked you up anyway. Serena Vale, college degree in journalism. Father's a real estate developer who ran into financial trouble. No previous relationship with our family that I could find, which means this was arranged. Your brother needed a wife. My father needed debt forgiveness. Basic transaction." God, you sound like him now. Basic transaction. You know that's insane, right? People don't get married like they're signing corporate contracts. Or at least they shouldn't. "Welcome to the Moretti family, where everything is a contract and everyone has a price." Julia's expression darkened slightly. "You don't like it here. Would you? Honestly?" "No, this place always felt more like a museum than a home. All these rules and traditions and dead relatives judging you from paintings. I got out as soon as I could, moved to Rome for university and never looked back. I only come back when Lucien guilts me into family dinners or when something important happens. Like him suddenly acquiring a wife no one knew about." Serena appreciated the honesty. At least someone in this family was willing to speak plainly. "Does he know you're here?" "He knows I'm at the estate. Whether he knows I'm bothering his new bride in the gardens? Probably not. Lucien has this annoying habit of thinking he can control everything by compartmentalizing. Keep me away from the business. Keep you away from me. Keep everyone in their designated boxes so nothing unpredictable happens." Julia leaned back against the bench. "But I've been dealing with his control issues for 23 years. I know how to work around them." "You seem close." "We used to be, before Papa died and Lucien turned into a stranger wearing my brother's face. Now we mostly perform being a family when necessary and avoid each other the rest of the time. It's easier that way, less fighting about things we can't change." A thought occurred to Serena. Dangerous. Probably stupid, but she'd already stepped into enough traps today that one more wouldn't make much difference. "Julia, can I ask you something about your family's business? What exactly do you think Lucien does?" "Venture capital, tech investments, real estate development. The same thing Papa did, just with better PR." Julia frowned. "Why?" "No reason, just curious. But Julia wasn't stupid. Her eyes narrowed. You're asking if I know the truth, if I know what our family really built its fortune on. She stood up, walked to the cliff edge, stared out at the sea for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, harder, older. I'm not as naive as Lucien thinks I am. I know Papa wasn't a saint. I know there are parts of the Moretti legacy that don't appear in annual reports or company statements. But there's a difference between suspecting something and having it confirmed. And Lucien has worked very hard to make sure I never have to confront the confirmation. To protect you, to control me, to keep me innocent and compliant and dependent on him for the version of reality he wants me to believe. Julia turned back. My brother thinks love means shielding people from truth. I think it means trusting them enough to handle it. That's why we don't talk anymore. Not really. Every conversation is just him performing the role of protective older brother and me performing the role of ignorant little sister. Neither of us is honest. Neither of us is real. Serena felt something shift in her understanding of the Moretti family dynamics. It wasn't just Lucien trapped in a system he'd inherited. Julia was trapped too. In a different cage, a prettier one, but still a cage built by someone else's decisions about what she could handle. If you could know the truth, the whole truth, would you want to? Julia considered this. Part of me says yes, that I deserve to know what I'm actually part of. But another part of me is terrified. Because once you know something, you can't unknow it. And maybe Lucien is right. Maybe some truths destroy you just by existing in your head. She smiled sadly. But you didn't get that choice, did you? You got sold into this family and had the truth shoved down your throat whether you wanted it or not. Something like that. Then I guess we're both prisoners, just in different ways. They sat together in silence after that. Two women trapped in a family that valued legacy more than happiness, trying to find small rebellions in conversations their keepers wouldn't approve of. Eventually, Julia excused herself. Classes in Rome she couldn't miss, a life she'd built away from Moretti blood and Moretti money. She hugged Serena before leaving. A real hug. Not the performative kind Serena had grown used to from her father's society friends. Just honest human contact between people who recognized each other's suffering. After Julia left, Serena remained in the gardens until sunset painted the sky colors that felt too beautiful for what she was living through. Then she made her way back inside, through halls that had started to feel familiar in the way prisons become familiar to long-term inmates, and found Katerina waiting at the base of the main staircase. A package arrived for you, the older woman said, gesturing to a box on the side table. Your personal items from your father's house. Serena opened the box with hands that shook despite her best efforts. Inside, clothes she'd actually chosen. Books she'd actually read. Photographs of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her laptop, her journals. Small pieces of identity she'd thought were lost. She pulled out a framed photo of her and Elena from 3 years ago, both of them laughing at something their father had said before the gambling debts, before the creditors, before everything collapsed. Elena looked so young, so innocent, exactly the way Julia had looked when she talked about trusting Lucien's version of reality. Serena wondered how long that innocence would last, if she'd managed to preserve it by accepting this marriage, or if she'd only delayed the inevitable corruption that touched everyone the Moretti family owned. Thank you, Serena told Katerina, gathering the box. There's one more thing. A letter. Hand-delivered this morning. Katerina produced an envelope. Heavy paper. No return address. Serena opened it carefully. Inside, a single page written in handwriting she recognized from years of forged excuse notes and lying reference letters. Serena, I know you hate me. I've known since the night you found the contracts. Probably known longer if I'm being honest with myself, which I'm trying to be now that lying doesn't serve any purpose. I can't apologize for what I did. Apologies require being sorry, and the truth is I'd do it again if it meant keeping you and Elena alive. The men I owed money to, they don't negotiate. They don't accept payment plans. They collect debts in blood, or they collect them in cash, and I didn't have cash. The Moretti family offered a solution. Was it fair? No. Was it your choice? No. But it was survival. And I chose your survival over your happiness because I'm a coward who couldn't face losing you the way I lost everything else. Lucien Moretti is many things, most of them terrible, But he's not his father. I did my research before signing those contracts. He's trying to transform that family into something legitimate, trying to escape the violence that built his fortune. Maybe he'll succeed. Maybe he'll fail. But if he does succeed, you'll be part of something better than what I gave you. That's not comfort, I know that, but it's all I have left to offer. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. I'm sorry I became the father you got stuck with. And I'm sorry that even now, I can't promise things will get better. But I can promise this. I will never forgive myself for what I did to you. That doesn't help you, but it's true. Dad. Serena read the letter 3 times, tried to find the lie, the manipulation, the angle her father was working. But it just felt tired, honest in the way people are honest when they've run out of energy for deception. She folded the paper carefully, placed it back in the envelope, carried the box upstairs to her room, and unpacked pieces of her old life into drawers of her new one. The laptop still worked. Serena opened it, checked her email for the first time in 2 weeks, found messages from friends who didn't know she'd been sold, job opportunities she'd never be able to accept, subscription renewals for magazines she'd never read again. The digital detritus of a life that had ended the moment she signed marriage documents in a chapel overlooking the Mediterranean. She almost closed the laptop, almost packed it away with the other artifacts of her previous existence. But then she noticed a folder on the desktop she didn't recognize, recently added. She opened it. Inside, files, documents, financial records, communications between her father and various criminal organizations across Europe. Evidence of debts that went deeper than she'd imagined. Loans from Moscow, Prague, Berlin. Amounts that made 7 million euros look like pocket money. Her father hadn't just gambled badly. He'd been involved in money laundering, in schemes that touched drug trafficking and arms dealing and things that made her stomach turn. And at the bottom of the folder, a video file. She clicked it. Her father's face filled the screen. Older than she remembered, more worn, recording in what looked like a hotel room somewhere anonymous and temporary. Serena, if you're watching this, it means you found what I left you. Good. You deserve to know the whole truth, even if it makes you hate me more than you already do. He took a breath, looked directly at the camera. The Moretti family didn't approach me randomly. I approached them. 6 months before your wedding, I'd heard through contacts that Lucien needed a wife for some internal family power struggle and was looking for candidates who met specific criteria. Elite education, no existing Mafia connections, desperate enough to accept an arrangement. I realized you checked every box. Serena's hands went numb. She'd assumed her father had been forced into the arrangement, that he'd been a victim of circumstance, but he'd initiated contact, had sold her proactively. The video continued. I negotiated the terms myself, made sure the contract included financial independence for you at the end of the year, made sure Elena would be protected regardless of outcome, made sure that if you did this, if you survived it, you'd walk away with enough money to never need anyone again. It's not enough. I know that. But it's something. He rubbed his face, looking ancient, destroyed. I also made one other arrangement. This folder you're looking at contains copies of every financial crime I've ever committed, every illegal transaction, every connection to organized crime. It's evidence that would put me in prison for the rest of my life if it reached the right authorities. I'm giving it to you, my freedom in your hands. If you want revenge, if you want justice for what I did, you have everything you need to destroy me. The video ended. Serena sat frozen, staring at a blank screen, trying to process what she'd just learned. Her father had sold her intentionally, had negotiated the terms of her captivity like a business deal, but he'd also given her the power to annihilate him, had placed his entire future in her hands, and trusted that she'd choose what to do with it. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't redemption, just a broken man trying to give his daughter the one thing he'd taken from her, choice. Serena closed the laptop, looked around her bedroom, at the luxury that had been purchased with her body, at the prison that had been decorated to look like freedom, at the life that wasn't hers but that she had to inhabit anyway. She thought about Raffaele's offer, about Lucien's contract, about Giulia's innocence and Caterina's warnings, and the photographs of corpses on Lucien's wall. Everyone wanted something from her. Everyone had an angle. Her father wanted absolution he didn't deserve. Lucien wanted an heir to protect his legacy. Raffaele wanted her cooperation to destroy Lucien. Even Giulia wanted something, even if it was just confirmation that someone else saw through the family's carefully constructed lies. But what did Serena want? She'd spent the last 2 weeks surviving, enduring, playing the role she'd been assigned. But survival wasn't the same as living, and endurance wasn't the same as fighting back. The folder her father had given her was power, evidence that could destroy one branch of her captivity. And the conversation with Raphael had revealed another power, the ability to choose which monster won the family war. She wasn't as helpless as everyone assumed. She had leverage, small, fragile, but leverage nonetheless. The question was what to do with it. Serena spent 3 days alone in the estate while Lucien remained in Milan. 3 days exploring rooms she wasn't supposed to enter and reading books in languages she didn't speak and trying to map the edges of her cage. She avoided Katerina when possible, avoided Raphael entirely, just existed in the spaces between other people's expectations, trying to find solid ground. On the 4th morning, Lucien returned. She was in the library when she heard the car pull up, heard voices in the entrance hall, heard Katerina giving reports on household affairs in that efficient monotone she'd perfected over decades of service. Serena stayed where she was, curled in the same leather chair where Raphael had made his offer, pretending to read Italian poetry she couldn't understand. Lucien found her 20 minutes later. He looked worse than when he'd left, exhausted, shadows under his eyes darker than before. His suit was wrinkled, tie loosened, like he'd been wearing it for 48 hours straight and had forgotten that appearances mattered. "You're in my chair," he said from the doorway. "Your chair, your library, your house, your wife." Serena didn't look up from the book. "Is there anything in this place that isn't yours?" "Your thoughts, I assume." Lucien crossed to the window, stared out at gardens he probably never visited. "Katerina said you met Julia. Your sister's lovely, much more human than you. She's also naive, protected from the truth of what this family is. She knows more than you think. She's just polite enough not to confront you about it." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Did you tell her?" "I didn't tell her anything, but she's not stupid. She suspects, and your attempts to keep her innocent are just another form of control." Serena finally closed the book, set it aside. "You and your uncle have that in common. Both of you think you know what's best for everyone else. Both of you treat people like chess pieces. You met Raphael. It wasn't a question. He made me an interesting offer, said if I simply failed to produce an heir, he'd forgive my father's debts immediately and give me freedom without conditions. All I have to do is nothing for 12 months. Lucien turned from the window. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had sharpened, focused. "And you're telling me this because I want you to know that you're not the only one with leverage. Raphael thinks I'm an asset he can turn. You think I'm property you've purchased. My father thinks I'm a problem he solved. But none of you have actually asked what I want. What do you want?" The question hung between them. Honest, direct. Maybe the first truly honest thing Lucien had ever asked her. Serena stood, crossed the library until they were face to face, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into his features, close enough to smell coffee and cigarettes and expensive cologne trying to mask 3 days without sleep. "I want the truth. All of it. No protection, no compartmentalization, no deciding what I can handle. If I'm going to spend a year in this nightmare, I deserve to know exactly what I'm part of." "You don't want that, trust me." "Don't tell me what I want. I've had enough of men making decisions for me." Her voice rose, cracked. "Your uncle showed me photographs today. Asked if I knew what your father did to people who disappointed him. Asked if I understood that the money that paid for this estate came from weapons sales that fueled wars across 3 continents. He told me things about your family that made me physically sick, and then he offered me an escape route. So yes, Lucien, I want the truth, because right now the only person being honest with me is the one trying to destroy you." Lucien was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Finally, he moved to the library door, closed it, locked it, returned to where she stood and said 2 words. "Follow me." He led her through the estate to the west wing, to the corridor she'd been explicitly forbidden from entering, past doors that remained locked even now, to his bedroom, the room where she'd heard him screaming, where photographs of violence decorated the walls like some kind of memorial to darkness. Lucien opened the door, gestured for her to enter. Serena stepped inside, looked again at the crime scene photographs covering every available surface. bodies, blood. Evidence of atrocities that would haunt her for years. "This is what my father built," Lucien said quietly, standing in the doorway like he was afraid to enter his own room. The Moretti Empire. 3 generations of violence disguised as legitimate business. My grandfather started with local protection rackets in Sicily. My father expanded into international arms dealing. By the time I inherited, we had operations in 17 countries. Weapons, drugs, human trafficking. If it generated profit and required destroying human lives, the Moretti family sold it. He moved to the wall, touched one photograph, a man's face, half destroyed by bullets. This was Marco Salvi. He worked for my father, tried to skim money from a weapons shipment. My father had him executed in front of the entire organization. I was 16. He made me watch, made me understand that mercy was weakness, and weakness got you killed. Another photograph. A woman this time, Anna Russo, journalist who got too close to exposing our money laundering operations. My father had her killed, made it look like suicide. She had 2 children. They're probably still wondering why their mother jumped off a bridge. He continued around the room. Each photograph had a story. Each story was worse than the last. By the time he finished, Serena was shaking, not from fear, from rage, from the horrible understanding that the luxury surrounding her had been purchased with an ocean of blood. "When my father died, I inherited all of this," Lucien continued. "The business, the violence, the expectation that I'd continue the legacy. But I couldn't. I'd watched him destroy too many lives, watched him turn human beings into commodities. So I started dismantling, closed the weapons operations, shut down the trafficking networks, poured money into legitimate businesses, real estate, technology, things that didn't require corpses. And your uncle opposed this. Raphael sees legitimacy as weakness. He believes the only reason anyone respects the Moretti name is because they fear it. And he's probably right. In our world, fear is currency. I'm trying to change that currency to something else, anything else. But it's like trying to rebuild a house while standing on its foundation. Every floor I renovate still rests on blood." Lucien sat down heavily on the edge of his bed, looked at her with eyes that had stopped pretending they weren't broken. "So that's the truth, Serena. I'm a man trying to escape darkness by using tools forged in that darkness. I purchased you like property to prevent my uncle from resurrecting the violence I've spent a decade dismantling. I reduced you to an incubator because I couldn't figure out another way to protect my sister and preserve what little progress I've made. And every day I wake up in this room surrounded by reminders of what my family is, wondering if transformation is even possible or if I'm just a criminal in better packaging." The silence that followed felt heavier than the photographs, heavier than the truth. Serena walked to the window, stared out at the estate that had been built on bones and watered with tears, and was somehow still beautiful from a distance. "Your uncle said you were a monster pretending to be civilized, that hiding violence behind corporate letterhead didn't change what you are. He's not wrong. No, he's not." Serena turned back to face him. "But he's also not right. Monsters don't keep photographs of their victims on the walls. They don't lose sleep over the darkness they've inherited. They don't spend 10 years trying to transform an empire built on suffering. Monsters enjoy the blood. You're just drowning in it and trying to find shore. That doesn't absolve me of what I did to you. No, it doesn't. But it means you're something more complicated than what your uncle wants me to believe. And maybe something more salvageable than what you believe about yourself." Lucien looked at her like she'd just spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. "After everything I just told you, after showing you exactly what kind of family you've been sold into, you're not running. Where would I run? Your guards patrol the perimeter, your cameras watch every exit, and even if I escaped, Raffaele would just leverage my father and sister until I came back. I'm trapped here no matter what. The only choice I have left is what kind of prisoner to be, passive or active, victim or player." She crossed the room, stood in front of him, forced him to look up at her. "I'll make you a deal, Lucien, a real one. Not a contract your lawyers drafted, just 2 people being honest for once. I'll stay. I'll fulfill your 1-year requirement. I'll give you the heir your uncle demands. But in exchange, you stop treating me like property. You stop making decisions about what truth I can handle. And you let me help you dismantle whatever's left of your father's empire. Because right now the only person fighting the darkness is you. And you're losing. Badly. You need an ally who isn't on your payroll and doesn't owe you inherited loyalty. You need someone who hates this system as much as you do. Why would you help me? I'm the reason you're trapped here. Because Raffaele is worse. Because your sister deserves better than being his next bargaining chip. Because my father's confession made me realize that sometimes the only way out of hell is through it, and you're the closest thing I have to a guide. She paused. And because despite everything, despite the contract and the photographs and the fucking nightmare you've dragged me into, I believe you actually want to change. That has to count for something. Lucien stood. They were close now. Close enough that Serena could see every sleepless night etched into his face. Every choice that had cost him pieces of humanity he'd never get back. Every moment of doubt that he'd buried under control and distance and the cold mechanical language of contracts. If we do this, if you become my ally instead of just my contractual wife, things will get worse before they get better. Raffaele won't accept losing quietly. The old guard will fight back, and you'll see things that make these photographs look merciful. I've already seen my father sell me to settle his debts. I've already spent 2 weeks living in a prison disguised as paradise. I've already accepted that my body is now a bargaining chip in a war I didn't start. How much worse can it get? Lucien almost smiled. Almost. You really want to know? No, but I'm going to find out anyway. He extended his hand. Not the way he had at their wedding, cold, transactional, mechanical. This time, it felt like an actual offer, an invitation into alliance instead of ownership. Serena took it, and somewhere in the ruins of a marriage that had started as a contract, something shifted. Not love, not even trust, just recognition. Two people who'd been broken by systems bigger than themselves, choosing to break those systems back. Outside, the Mediterranean continued its endless rhythm against ancient cliffs. Inside, Lucien Moretti and Serena Vale, now Serena Moretti, whether she wanted the name or not, stood in a room full of ghosts and made promises that would either save them both or destroy what little remained of their humanity. The only certainty was that there was no going back. Not now. Not after this. They'd crossed the point of no return together, and whatever came next would reshape them both into something neither had planned to become. The question was whether that something would be better or worse than what they were running from. Serena suspected they'd find out soon enough, and that when they did, neither of them would survive it unchanged. The alliance changed nothing and everything simultaneously. Serena woke the next morning in her separate wing of the estate, sunlight cutting through expensive curtains like accusations, and realized she'd just agreed to help dismantle a criminal empire while trapped inside it. The irony tasted like metal. Like blood she hadn't spilled yet but probably would before this year ended. Lucien was already awake when she found him in his office, a room she'd been told existed but had never seen. Third floor, northwest corner, overlooking nothing but pine trees and security fencing disguised as natural landscape. He sat behind a desk that had probably witnessed 3 generations of Moretti decisions, studying financial reports on screens that displayed numbers large enough to fund small nations. "We start with the paper trail," he said, without looking up. No greeting, no acknowledgement that 12 hours ago they'd stood in his bedroom surrounded by photographs of corpses and made promises neither of them knew how to keep. Just business. Always business with him. My father kept 2 sets of books, legitimate operations that pass audits and shadow accounts that fund everything illegal. I've been trying to close the shadow accounts for years, but money has inertia. It doesn't disappear just because you want it to. Serena closed the door behind her. Where does it go? Offshore, shell corporations in the Caymans, Luxembourg, Singapore. Accounts under names that don't exist attached to businesses that produce nothing. My father was paranoid but brilliant. He built a financial system so complex that even his own accountants couldn't fully map it. When he died, I inherited a maze with no center. So we find the center. We try. Again. Lucien finally looked at her. The exhaustion from yesterday had deepened. He looked like he'd been awake all night. Probably had been. But you should understand something before we begin. The people who benefit from these shadow accounts, they're not going to surrender their revenue streams quietly, and they're not all strangers. Some of them are sitting at this estate right now. Employees, security personnel, even Katerina has family members on payrolls that shouldn't exist. You're saying we can't trust anyone. I'm saying everyone has a price, and my family has spent decades paying it. Loyalty here isn't earned through respect. It's purchased through fear and money. And the moment we threaten either, people will choose survival over principles. He pulled up a new screen. Names, dozens of them. These are the internal threats. People who report to me publicly but answer to Raffaele privately. I've been documenting their communications for 2 years, building evidence of their divided loyalties, waiting for the right moment to purge them all simultaneously. Serena studied the list, recognized some names from staff she'd encountered. Others were unfamiliar. Why haven't you fired them already? Because Raffaele would just replace them with new infiltrators. Better to keep the devils you know and monitor their betrayals than face unknown enemies. Lucien stood, moved to the window. But that strategy requires me to live in a house where half the people would kill me if the price was right. It's exhausting. Paranoia as a survival mechanism. So what's changed? Why act now? You. He turned back. Raphael made you an offer, which means he's escalating. He thinks he can turn you against me, use you as leverage to undermine the heir requirement. If he succeeds, I lose everything. Which means I can't afford to wait anymore. I have to move first. Serena absorbed this. The weight of being a catalyst for violence she hadn't chosen. What do you need me to do? Lucien returned to his desk, pulled up architectural plans of the estate. Next week, I'm hosting a meeting with the board of Moretti Holdings, 20 executives who control various aspects of our legitimate operations. Half of them are loyal, half report to Raffaele. I need to know which is which before the meeting happens, because I'm planning to announce a full audit of all company finances. Anyone hiding shadow accounts will panic, and panic makes people sloppy. You want me to spy on your own executives? I want you to observe. Listen, report patterns I might miss because I'm too close to see clearly. He handed her a small device. Looked like a high-end smartphone, but probably contained surveillance equipment that would make intelligence agencies jealous. This connects to the estate's security network. Cameras, audio feeds, digital traffic. Technically illegal, definitely unethical, but necessary if we're going to survive what's coming. Serena took the device, felt its weight, heavier than it should have been, or maybe that was just the moral compromise it represented. And if I find something, if one of your executives is working for Raphael, then we document it, build a case, and when the moment is right, we eliminate the threat. Lucien's expression didn't change when he said eliminate, like he was discussing firing an underperforming employee instead of potentially ordering someone's execution. I know how that sounds. I know what it makes me. But this is the world we live in. Mercy gets you killed. Hesitation gets you killed. The only way to transform this empire is to first survive it, and survival requires becoming the thing you're trying to escape. The contradiction was dizzying. Lucien wanted legitimacy, but was willing to use illegitimate methods to achieve it. Wanted to escape his father's legacy while employing his father's tactics. Wanted to be different while remaining fundamentally the same. Serena wondered if he heard the dissonance, if he understood that you couldn't burn down a house from inside it without becoming part of the ashes. But she'd made her choice. Crossed the point of no return. So she pocketed the surveillance device and tried not to think about what she'd just agreed to become. The week that followed was a masterclass in paranoia. Serena learned the rhythms of the estate. When staff rotated shifts, when guards changed positions, when Lucien Sazim met with executives behind closed doors that weren't quite as soundproof as they thought. She watched. Listened. Documented conversations that would probably destroy lives when they were finally used as evidence. The executives started arriving 3 days before the scheduled board meeting. Expensive cars, designer luggage, smiles that didn't reach eyes that were already calculating advantage. They treated Serena with carefully calibrated politeness, acknowledging her existence as Lucien's wife while making it clear she was decorative rather than functional. She played the role, smiled at appropriate moments, asked questions vapid enough to be dismissed. Let them underestimate her while the surveillance device in her pocket recorded every word. Antonio Ricci arrived first, CFO of Moretti Holdings. Late 50s, silver hair, a smile that had probably closed deals worth hundreds of millions. He greeted Lucien with warmth that felt rehearsed, then spent his first evening making calls in the garden where he thought no one could hear. Serena listened through the audio feed while pretending to read in the library. "The audit announcement will happen Friday," Antonio said in rapid Italian. Serena's translation app converted it in real time. Lucien is overconfident, thinks he's cleaned up the accounts enough to survive scrutiny. He hasn't. We've been moving money for months. By the time auditors arrive, the trail will be so convoluted they'll spend years trying to untangle it. A pause. Someone responding on the other end. Then Antonio again. "Raphael wants confirmation on the wife's situation. Is she cooperating or does she need additional pressure?" Serena's blood went cold. She saved the recording, flagged it, continued listening. "Understood. I'll make contact. Feel her out. If she's turned against Lucien, we accelerate the timeline. If she's still loyal, we apply leverage through the sister. Swiss boarding schools have terrible security once you know which guards are bribable." The call ended. Serena sat in the library, hands shaking, trying to process what she'd just heard. Antonio wasn't just reporting to Raffaele. He was actively working to sabotage Lucien's audit, and they were planning to use Elena as a weapon if Serena didn't cooperate. She found Lucien in his office an hour later, played him the recording without preamble, watched his expression harden with each sentence until his face looked carved from stone. "Antonio has been with the family for 30 years, Lucien said quietly when the recording ended. "He managed my father's legitimate accounts, helped me transition operations after the inheritance. I trusted him. He's been stealing from you for months, maybe years. Worse than that, he's been undermining every attempt I've made to legitimize the business, probably reporting my strategies to Raphael in real time. Every move I've planned, every reform I've implemented, Antonio knew about it first and found ways to sabotage it." Lucien closed his eyes, breathed, opened them again with something cold and final in his expression. "He needs to be removed, immediately." "Removed how?" "However necessary to protect what we're building." Serena heard what he wasn't saying, heard the violence lurking beneath corporate language. "You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about eliminating a threat that has already demonstrated willingness to harm innocent people. Elena is 17. She has nothing to do with this war. But Antonio just threatened her because he knows I care about you, and hurting your sister would destroy you, which would weaken me. That's not business. That's terrorism, and I don't negotiate with terrorists. There has to be another way. Arrest? Deportation. Something that doesn't require murder." Lucien stood, crossed to the window, stared out at nothing. "You want to know the difference between my father and me? My father would have already killed Antonio and his entire family as a message to anyone else considering betrayal. I'm sitting here having a conversation about alternatives. That's progress. Small, insufficient, but progress nonetheless. That's not good enough. No, it's not. But it's all I have right now." He turned back. "I won't kill Antonio, not yet, but I will confront him, force him to choose between loyalty and Raffaele. And if he chooses wrong, I'll make sure he understands the consequences before they become permanent." The confrontation happened at dinner. Lucien arranged it deliberately, gathered all the executives in the formal dining room, served wine that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a month, and waited until dessert before detonating the bomb. "I've become aware of certain irregularities in our financial reporting," he said conversationally, like he was discussing the weather instead of accusations that could end careers. "Accounts that don't reconcile. Transfers that bypass standard approval channels. Patterns that suggest someone within our organization has been operating a parallel financial structure without authorization." The table went silent. 20 executives suddenly very interested in their plates. Antonio maintained his composure better than most, smiled, sipped wine, projected the calm of someone with nothing to hide. "Irregularities happen in organizations this size," he said smoothly. "I'm sure it's just accounting errors. Nothing a proper audit can't resolve." "I'm sure you're right." Lucien's smile didn't reach his eyes, "which is why I've already initiated that audit. External firm. No connection to Moretti Holdings. They'll arrive Monday to begin reviewing every account, every transfer, every financial decision made in the last 5 years. Complete transparency. Nothing to hide means nothing to fear." Antonio's smile thinned. "That seems excessive. Our internal auditors are perfectly capable. Our internal auditors report to you, which creates a conflict of interest if the irregularities originate from your department. Lucien set down his wine glass with careful precision. I'm not accusing anyone of impropriety. I'm simply ensuring that the Moretti Holdings financial structure can withstand external scrutiny. Surely you support that goal, Antonio, unless there's something you'd like to disclose before the auditors arrive. The challenge hung in the air. Serena watched Antonio's face, watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. He could confess, could admit to the shadow accounts and hope Lucien showed mercy. Or he could double down, maintain innocence and pray the evidence could be hidden before auditors found it. He chose poorly. I have nothing to disclose. My department's records are impeccable. If your external auditors find anything questionable, it will be because someone has been sabotaging our systems. Perhaps the person making these accusations should examine their own paranoia before destroying 30 years of loyal service with baseless allegations. Lucien nodded slowly. Then I look forward to the audit proving your innocence. Dinner is concluded. Everyone is free to return to their rooms. The executives scattered. Most of them looked relieved. A few looked terrified. Antonio looked furious. He lingered after the others left, waiting until only he, Lucien, and Serena remained in the dining room. You're making a mistake, Antonio said quietly, dangerously. Your father understood that some operations require discretion, that transparency is a luxury we can't afford in this industry. You're going to destroy everything he built chasing some fantasy of legitimacy that doesn't exist in our world. My father built an empire on corpses. I'm trying to build something that doesn't require mass graves in the foundation. If that destroys his legacy, good. It deserves to be destroyed. And what about the people who depend on that legacy? The families who've worked for the Morettis for generations? The communities that survive because of money flowing through shadow accounts? You shut that down. You're not just destroying your father's empire. You're destroying the ecosystem that's grown around it. Lucien leaned back in his chair. Are you threatening me, Antonio? I'm reminding you that actions have consequences, and that your crusade for legitimacy might cost more than you're willing to pay. Get out! The words came out flat, final. Antonio stared at Lucien for a long moment, then left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than shouting. Serena waited until she was sure they were alone before speaking. He's going to run, probably tonight, destroy evidence, warn Raphael, disappear before the auditors arrive. I know. I'm counting on it. You want him to run? I want him to feel trapped. Desperate people make mistakes, and I need Antonio to make one big enough that even Raphael can't protect him. Lucien pulled out his phone, sent a text to someone. I've had his communications monitored since you brought me the recording. The moment he tries to contact Raphael or access shadow accounts, we'll know. And we'll have evidence that even he can't explain away. The trap was elegant, brutal. Exactly the kind of strategy Lucien's father would have employed. Serena wondered if he heard the echo, if he understood that becoming his father's opposite still required using his father's methods. They waited in Lucien's office, 2 hours, 3, watching security feeds and communication intercepts like they were hunting prey instead of documenting betrayal. Finally, at 1 a.m, Antonio made his move. He left his guest room carrying nothing, walked through hallways he thought weren't monitored, entered a study that had belonged to Lucien's father, a room that was supposed to be locked and sealed since the old man's death. Antonio had a key. Of course he did, probably given to him by Lucien's father decades ago as a symbol of trust that had been betrayed one transaction at a time. The surveillance feed showed Antonio going directly to a painting on the wall, moving it aside, revealing a safe behind it, entering a combination with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. The safe opened. Antonio removed files. USB drives. Evidence of shadow accounts and illegal operations that should have been destroyed years ago but had been preserved for exactly this kind of emergency. He's been using my father's safe to hide evidence, Lucien said, voice hollow. All this time I thought I'd cleaned out the old man's secrets, but Antonio kept copies. Probably as insurance in case I ever turned on him. On the screen, Antonio loaded everything into a briefcase, closed the safe, replaced the painting, prepared to leave with evidence that could destroy Lucien's legitimacy project. and prove Raffaele's accusations that the family's wealth was still built on illegal foundations. We have to stop him, Serena said. We will. Lucien sent another text. Security is already moving into position. Antonio won't make it off the estate. They intercepted him in the garage. 6 armed men appearing from shadows, surrounding Antonio before he could reach his car. Lucien and Serena arrived moments later. Antonio stood frozen, briefcase in hand, caught so completely there was no point in lying. I gave you a chance to confess, Lucien said quietly. Gave you an opportunity to explain yourself before this became permanent. You chose deception instead, because you would have destroyed me either way. Antonio's composure cracked, rage bleeding through. You think you're better than your father because you wear nicer suits and use corporate language instead of guns. But you're the same. Same arrogance. Same belief that the Moretti family can rewrite history just by deciding the past doesn't count. Your father understood reality. You're just a child playing at reform while the real world burns around you. Give me the briefcase. No. Lucien nodded to the security personnel. They moved forward. Antonio backed against his car, clutching the briefcase like it could save him. You lay hands on me, Raphael will have you killed. I'm under his protection. You can't touch me without starting a war. Then I'll start a war. Lucien's voice didn't rise, didn't change inflection, just stated fact. Give me the briefcase or my men will take it. Your choice. Antonio looked around, calculated odds, realized he'd already lost. Slowly, he handed over the briefcase. Lucien took it, opened it, examined the contents, files detailing every shadow account, every illegal operation, every piece of evidence that proved the Moretti fortune was still dirty despite a decade of attempted reform. How long? Lucien asked. How long what? How long have you been stealing from me? Antonio laughed, broken, bitter. Since the day your father died. He promised to take care of my family if anything happened to him. You were too busy playing reformer to honor that promise. So I honored it myself, took what I was owed, what your father would have given me if you hadn't decided his legacy was shameful. You weren't owed anything. You were paid generously for your service. I was paid in money that would disappear the moment you finished legitimizing the business. Your reforms don't just erase the Moretti family's criminal past. They erase everyone who helped build that past. All of us who kept the empire running while you were too young to understand what power required. You want to destroy the foundation and pretend the house will stand anyway. It won't. And when it collapses, it will crush everyone still inside. Lucien closed the briefcase, handed it to one of the security personnel, turned back to Antonio with an expression that had gone completely cold. You're fired, effective immediately. You have 24 hours to leave Italy. If you're still in the country after that, I'll have you arrested for embezzlement and corporate espionage. The evidence in this briefcase will ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison. You can't. I can, and I am. The only reason you're not dead right now is because I'm trying to be different from my father. But that mercy has limits. Test them, and you'll discover how much of his son I really am. Antonio stared at him, comprehension dawning. He'd expected execution, expected violence. The fact that Lucien was letting him live, that was somehow more terrifying than death would have been, because it meant Lucien had restraint, control, the capacity to choose mercy even when revenge would have been easier, and that made him infinitely more dangerous than his father had ever been. Security escorted Antonio from the garage. Serena watched him go, then turned to Lucien. You should have killed him. He's going straight to Raphael. We'll tell him everything about the audit, about the briefcase, about your plans to dismantle the shadow accounts. I know. Then why let him live? Because killing him would prove Raffaele right, would prove I'm just my father in better packaging. This way I give Antonio a choice. Disappear quietly and live, or run to Raphael and discover that protection has limits. Lucien looked at the briefcase in his security chief's hands. Besides, letting him go serves a purpose. Raffaele will know I found the evidence, will know his infiltrator failed, will understand that I'm not as blind as he assumed. That's worth more than Antonio's death. They returned to the main house. Lucien locked the briefcase in his office safe, a different safe from his father's, with combinations only he knew. Then he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle that was probably older than Serena and handed her one without asking if she wanted it. Thank you, he said quietly. For the surveillance. For finding Antonio's betrayal before he could use that evidence against us. You probably saved the legitimacy project. Maybe saved my life. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. For Elena. For everyone trapped in this system who didn't choose to be here. I know, that's why it matters. They drank in silence. The whiskey burned. Serena welcomed the pain, something real and immediate, instead of the slow, suffocating pressure of paranoia and surveillance and betrayal as a daily practice. What happens now? She asked. Now we prepare for Raffaele's response. He'll have heard about Antonio by morning. We'll know his infiltration strategy failed. We'll escalate to something more direct, more violent, the kind of confrontation I've been trying to avoid for 10 years. Can you win? I don't know. Raphael controls the old guard, the people who remember when the Moretti name meant fear instead of quarterly earnings. They're loyal to him because he represents everything they understand. Violence, territory, legacy built on blood. I represent change they don't trust and progress that threatens their positions. In a straight fight, he probably has more soldiers. But soldiers need financing, and I control the legitimate accounts, the money that pays for security, infrastructure, operations. If I freeze those accounts, Raffaele's forces can't sustain a prolonged conflict. They'd have to choose between loyalty to him and their own survival. Serena processed this. You're talking about starving out your own organization. I'm talking about forcing people to choose between the past and the future. Some will choose Raphael. Some will choose me. Most will choose whoever they think will win. That's not loyalty, that's pragmatism. But in our world, pragmatism is the closest thing to honesty you'll find. He finished his whiskey, set down the glass, looked at her with exhaustion that had turned into something darker, something that looked almost like defeat. You should sleep. Tomorrow will be worse than today. It always is. Serena didn't sleep, couldn't. Just lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the estate settle around her like a living thing preparing for violence. Somewhere in the darkness, Antonio was probably calling Raffaele, warning him, confirming suspicions, escalating the conflict from shadow war to open confrontation. And somewhere else in that same darkness, Lucien was probably awake too, surrounded by photographs of corpses, planning strategies that required becoming the monster he was trying to escape, caught in the same impossible contradiction that had trapped his father and his father's father going back generations. The cycle was exhausting, brutal, maybe unbreakable. But Serena had made her choice, had crossed into alliance with a man who was either trying to save his family or destroy it depending on which side of the war you asked. She'd surveil his enemies, document their betrayals, help him purge everyone who stood between him and the legitimacy he craved, and in doing so, she'd become exactly what she hated. A weapon wielded by people with more power than conscience. Property with functionality instead of agency. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so completely devastating. Morning came with bad news delivered by a breathless security chief who'd clearly been awake all night. Serena heard the commotion from her room, threw on clothes and ran downstairs to find Lucien already in the entrance hall, listening to reports that were making his expression darken with each sentence. Say that again, Lucien said quietly, dangerously. Antonio is dead. Found in his hotel room in Milan 3 hours ago. Single gunshot to the head. Suicide, according to preliminary police reports, but the scene was staged. Professional work. Someone wanted it to look self-inflicted, but didn't care if we knew better. Serena felt the floor tilt. Antonio had been alive when they let him go. Had been escorted off the estate with 24 hours to leave Italy. Now he was dead. Executed. Removed not by Lucien, but by someone else who wanted him silenced. Raphael, Lucien said. Almost certainly. Antonio failed, became a liability. Raphael eliminated him before he could be interrogated or turned against the organization. Have there been other incidents? The security chief hesitated. 3 more bodies found overnight. All Moretti Holdings employees. All people you flagged as potential Raphael loyalists. All killed in ways meant to look accidental, but clearly weren't. Lucien's hands clenched. Raphael is purging his own network, killing anyone who might become evidence against him. It's worse than that, sir. One of the bodies was Marco Santini, your head of security for the Rome office. He had a family, wife, 2 kids, They're asking questions. Police are asking questions. This is going to become public very quickly. The implications crashed down. Raffaele wasn't just defending his position. He was going scorched earth, eliminating anyone who could testify against him or expose the shadow accounts. And in doing so, he was creating a body count that would draw law enforcement attention the Moretti family couldn't afford. "Get me Raphael on the phone," Lucien said. "Sir, I don't think—" "Now." The call connected 3 minutes later, speakerphone in Lucien's office. Raphael's voice came through calm, almost amused. "Nephew, I was wondering when you'd reach out. You killed them. 4 people dead in one night. What the hell are you doing?" "Cleaning up your mess. You fired Antonio, made him vulnerable. I simply ensured he couldn't become a problem for the family. The others were similar risks. Loose ends that needed tying before your audit brings external scrutiny. Those were people, with families, with lives. Those were liabilities. I taught your father this lesson 30 years ago. Apparently I need to teach it to you as well. Sentiment is weakness. Hesitation is death. You wanted to play at legitimacy, so I'm protecting you from the consequences of that choice." Lucien's jaw tightened. "By creating a trail of bodies that will bring every law enforcement agency in Europe down on us? By demonstrating what power actually means? You think you can transform this family by filing paperwork and restructuring accounts. But power doesn't come from quarterly reports. It comes from fear. And right now, everyone in our organization is afraid. Afraid that crossing me has lethal consequences. That's the kind of clarity your legitimacy project lacks. This wasn't clarity. This was butchery. Call it what you want. The result is the same. Your audit can proceed. Your external accountants can examine whatever they like. They won't find evidence because everyone who could have provided it is now permanently silent. You're welcome." The line went dead. Lucien stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. Then, with sudden violence, he swept everything off his desk. Papers, laptop, coffee cup, all of it crashing to the floor in a rare display of the rage he usually kept buried beneath control. "He's destroying everything," Lucien said, voice raw. "Every person I try to protect, he kills. Every reform I implement, he sabotages. Every step toward legitimacy, he responds with more violence. I can't win. The system is designed to consume anyone who tries to change it." Serena picked up the laptop from where it had fallen. Screen cracked, but probably functional. She set it back on the desk carefully. "Then don't change it. Destroy it." "What?" "You've been trying to transform the Moretti Empire from within. Restructure it, reform it, make it legitimate while preserving the power structure. But the power structure is the problem. Raffaele controls it because your father built it to be controlled by people like him. People who understand violence and use it without hesitation. As long as that structure exists, he'll always have more soldiers than you. So what are you suggesting? Burn it down. All of it. The shadow accounts, the loyal soldiers, the legacy that's been choking you since your father died. Stop trying to save something that doesn't deserve salvation and build something new from scratch." Lucien stared at her. "That would destroy the family, eliminate generations of wealth and power, make us vulnerable to every enemy we've accumulated over the years. You're already vulnerable. Raphael just killed 4 people to prove it. The question isn't whether you can survive the current system, it's whether you're willing to risk everything to create a different one." The silence that followed felt heavier than the bodies Raphael had left scattered across Italy. Lucien walked to his window, stared out at the estate that had been in his family for over a century, at wealth built on suffering, at power purchased with blood, at a legacy that was slowly destroying him despite his best efforts to escape it. "If I do this, if I actually dismantle everything my family built, Raphael will kill me, and probably you, and definitely Julia. He won't accept losing his empire quietly. Then we move first. Hit him before he realizes what we're planning." "With what?" "I'm trying to avoid violence. You're suggesting I start a war." "I'm suggesting you finish one. Raphael started this war the moment he made you marry a stranger to prove your legitimacy. He's been fighting you for 10 years. You've just been too ethical to fight back. But ethics don't stop bullets, and hesitation doesn't stop men like your uncle from killing everyone you care about." Lucien turned from the window, looked at her with something that might have been hope or might have been despair. "You're asking me to become my father. I'm asking you to use your father's tools to build something he never could. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, violence is violence regardless of motivation. Maybe. But right now, the alternative is watching Raphael murder your employees one by one until there's no one left to reform. At least if you fight back, some of them might survive. The logic was brutal, undeniable. Lucien knew it. Serena could see the moment he accepted it. The shift in his expression from resistance to resignation. The acceptance that transformation required destruction, that escaping darkness meant first descending completely into it. Okay, he said quietly. We burn it down, all of it. But we do it strategically. No random violence, no collateral damage. We target the infrastructure Raffaele depends on, and we dismantle it piece by piece until he has no choice but to surrender or die. How do we start? With the money. Always follow the money. Lucien pulled up files on his now cracked laptop. Financial data. Account numbers. Names of shell corporations that existed only on paper but controlled millions in liquid assets. Raphael's power comes from funding loyal soldiers. If we freeze those funds, his army collapses. But freezing them requires access I don't have. The shadow accounts are encrypted, hidden behind firewalls my father built specifically to prevent exactly this kind of internal sabotage. So we need someone who knows how to break those firewalls. We need my father's accountant, the one person who understood the complete financial architecture. Problem is, he died 6 months after my father. Heart attack. Very convenient timing. Serena felt cold understanding wash over her. Raphael had him killed, eliminated the only person who could expose the shadow accounts. Probably, but my father was paranoid. He wouldn't have kept all that knowledge in one person's head. He would have left a backup. Insurance in case something happened to his primary accountant. Where? Lucien's expression darkened. The West Wing, in his private safe, the one Antonio was accessing last night. He stood. I need to examine everything in that safe. Every file, every drive. My father left me the keys to his empire. I just need to figure out which lock they open. They went together. Back to the study that had belonged to Lucien's father. The painting was already moved aside from Antonio's intrusion. The safe stood open. Lucien began removing contents methodically. File. USB drives. Photographs that made the ones in his bedroom look merciful. Evidence of decades of crimes that should have destroyed the family but had somehow been buried beneath money and influence and fear. At the bottom of the safe, a locked box. Small. Heavy. Lucien tried several keys before finding the right one. The box opened. Inside, a single USB drive and a handwritten note. Lucien read the note aloud. If you're reading this, I'm dead and you're desperate. This drive contains complete access to every shadow account, every shell corporation, every piece of the empire I built that doesn't appear in official records. Use it wisely, or don't use it at all. But understand, opening this box means accepting responsibility for everything I did, every body, every broken life, every sin committed in the name of family legacy. You can't cherry-pick morality. You either inherit all of it or none of it. Choose carefully. Papa. Serena watched Lucien's hands shake as he held the drive. Watched him process the impossible choice his father had left him. Accept the darkness completely and use its tools to escape it. Or reject it entirely and lose everything he'd spent a decade trying to build. He's still controlling you, Serena said quietly. Even dead. Even after everything you've done to escape his legacy. He left you one final trap. Use his tools and become him. Refuse his tools and lose to Raphael. Either way, he wins. I know. Lucien closed his fist around the drive. But maybe there's a third option. Use the tools, access the accounts, and then burn them all. Liquidate everything. Transfer the money to legitimate charities, foundations that undo the harm my family spent generations inflicting. It won't absolve me. Won't erase the blood. But it might mean something died for a reason instead of just dying. Raphael will kill you before you can transfer a single euro. Then I'll have to move faster than he can react. They were so focused on the drive that neither of them heard the footsteps in the hallway. Didn't realize they weren't alone until the study door closed with a soft click and a familiar voice said, I'm afraid that won't be possible. Serena spun around. Julia stood in the doorway, but her expression had changed. Gone was the naive architecture student. In her place stood something colder, harder, someone who'd been pretending innocence while playing a completely different game. "Julia," Lucien said carefully, "you shouldn't be here. This is family business, I know." She pulled a gun from her purse, held it with the comfort of someone who'd been trained. "I've always known, Lucien. You thought you were protecting me, keeping me innocent. But Papa told me everything before he died about the empire, the violence, the legacy you were trying to destroy, and he made me promise to stop you if you ever went too far." The betrayal hit harder than any of Raphael's moves. Lucien's own sister, the person he'd spent a decade protecting, standing in front of him with a weapon and years of deception in her eyes. "This whole time," Lucien said, voice hollow, "you've been working for Raphael. I've been working for the family. The real family. Not your fantasy version where we pretend Papa's empire was a mistake that needs correcting. He built something powerful, something that matters, and I won't let you destroy it because you're too weak to carry his legacy. Julia, please, give me the drive, now, or I'll kill your wife and take it anyway." The gun shifted, pointed at Serena. Julia's hand didn't shake, didn't hesitate. Just cold calculation from someone who'd been trained to see people as obstacles instead of humans. Serena realized with perfect clarity that she'd been wrong about everything. Wrong about Julia's innocence. Wrong about the family dynamics. Wrong about who could be trusted and who was playing which side. The naive architecture student had been a performance. The protective brother had been blind to what his sister was becoming. And now they were both trapped in a room with someone willing to kill them to preserve a legacy neither of them wanted to inherit. Lucien held up the drive. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way. A compromise that preserves the family without requiring... There is no compromise. There's Papa's empire or there's nothing, and I choose the empire." Julia's voice didn't waver. "I'm sorry, Lucien, I really am. You've been a good brother, but you've also been a traitor to everything our family built, and traitors don't get second chances." She pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Serena screamed. Lucien moved, not toward his sister but toward Serena, pushing her behind him, using his body as a shield against the sister he'd spent his life protecting. But Julia hadn't aimed at Serena. The bullet took Lucien in the shoulder, spun him around. Blood exploded across expensive fabric. He collapsed against the desk, clutching the wound, staring at his sister with an expression that was somehow worse than pain. Betrayal didn't have language, just raw incomprehension that the person you loved most had just tried to kill you. Julia advanced, gun steady. "The drive, Lucien. Last chance. Give it to me or the next shot goes somewhere more permanent." Lucien's hand tightened around the USB drive. Blood leaked between his fingers. He looked at Serena, then back at his sister. And in that moment, Serena saw him make a choice that would change everything. He threw the drive. Not to Julia, to Serena. "Run," he gasped. "Get out. Use it. Burn everything. Don't let her..." Julia fired again. This time the bullet hit center mass. Lucien jerked, slumped. His eyes went wide with shock and pain, and something that looked almost like relief. Like he'd been waiting for this betrayal his whole life and was almost grateful it had finally arrived. Serena caught the drive, turned, ran. Behind her, Julia was screaming, "Stop her! Someone stop her!" But the estate was chaos. Security personnel didn't know who to obey. Didn't know if Julia had authority to give orders. Didn't know if Lucien was still alive, or if the chain of command had just violently reorganized itself. Serena used the confusion, ran through hallways she'd memorized during weeks of surveillance, through the kitchen where staff scattered at the sight of blood on her clothes, through the gardens toward the southern wall where she'd once sat planning escape routes she thought she'd never use. The wall was 15 feet high, stone, no handholds, but desperation makes people creative. Serena found a maintenance ladder half hidden behind rose bushes, dragged it to the wall, climbed with shaking hands and a USB drive clutched between her teeth like the only thing that mattered in the world. At the top of the wall, she looked back, saw Julia emerge from the house, saw security personnel forming around her, saw the estate that had been her prison transforming into a hunting ground. Then she jumped, landed wrong, felt something in her ankle give way with a pop that meant weeks of healing if she survived the next few hours. Pain exploded up her leg, but she forced herself to move, limping, stumbling, following the tree line away from the estate toward the road that led to civilization and safety and a world that suddenly seemed very far away. Behind her, shouts, searchlights cutting through darkness, the sound of vehicles starting. They were coming. Of course they were coming. Julia wouldn't let her escape, not with the drive, not with access to everything the Moretti family had spent generations hiding. Serena ran until her lungs burned and her ankle screamed, and the drive in her pocket felt heavier than all the bodies that had purchased it. Somewhere behind her, Lucien was probably dying, shot by his own sister, betrayed by the person he'd sacrificed everything to protect. And somehow, Serena was the one who'd escaped, the one carrying the weapon that could destroy the Empire or save what was left of it. She didn't know which option was worse, didn't know if revenge was justice or if destruction was salvation. Just knew that she was alive and he wasn't, and the choice of what happened next had fallen to the last person who should have been responsible for it. A woman who'd been sold like livestock, who'd become a spy, who'd allied with a monster trying to become human, and who now held the power to burn down everything he'd died trying to transform. The universe had a terrible sense of irony, and Serena was about to discover exactly how terrible it could be. The forest swallowed Serena whole. Pine branches clawed at her face, drew blood she couldn't afford to lose, left scratches that burned but didn't slow her down. Her ankle screamed with every step, broken or badly sprained, didn't matter which, because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready to die yet. Not after everything. Not when Lucien's blood was still wet on her clothes and his sister's bullets were still echoing in her ears. The USB drive in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Like all the corpses that had paid for it were hanging from her belt, dragging her down, demanding she acknowledge the cost of survival. She ignored them, ignored the pain, ignored the voice in her head screaming that she should go back, should check if Lucien was alive, should do something other than run like a coward through trees that didn't care about human suffering. Behind her, vehicle engines roared to life. Headlights swept through the darkness, hunting. Julia wasn't waiting, wasn't hoping Serena would get lost in the woods and die of exposure. She was mobilizing every resource the Moretti family had to track down the woman who'd stolen their secrets and run. Serena crashed through underbrush that tore at her jeans, stumbled over roots she couldn't see in the darkness, kept moving because movement was the only thing left. Her lungs burned. Her ankle was on fire. Blood from the scratches on her face dripped into her eyes, mixing with sweat and tears she didn't remember crying. The road appeared suddenly, asphalt cutting through wilderness like a scar. Serena emerged from the trees, limping, bleeding, looking like exactly what she was. A woman fleeing violence with nothing but the clothes on her back and information that could topple an empire. A truck was approaching from the south, headlights cutting through pre-dawn darkness. Serena stepped into the road, waved her arms. The truck slowed, then stopped. An older man leaned out the window, eyes widening at the sight of her. "Madonna Santa, what happened to you?" "Please," Serena's voice came out raw, desperate. "I need help. There are people chasing me, bad people. I need to get to Milan, to the police. Please." The man hesitated, probably saw the blood, the panic, the desperation of someone who'd just witnessed something that broke them. But whatever he saw on her face convinced him. He unlocked the passenger door. "Get in, quickly." Serena climbed into the truck, slammed the door. The man accelerated before she'd even fastened her seatbelt. Behind them, headlights appeared at the tree line. Vehicles emerging from the estate, spreading out to search the surrounding roads. "Who's chasing you?" the driver asked. "People I can't outrun alone. How far to Milan?" 40 minutes if I push it, but if someone's really after you, maybe we should stop at the local police station. It's closer." "No, they have police on their payroll. Local stations won't help me. I need federal authorities, people who can't be bought." The driver glanced at her, saw something in her expression that made him press harder on the accelerator. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I just witnessed something I shouldn't have. And now the people who did it want to make sure I can't talk." It was close enough to the truth. The driver didn't need to know about the USB drive, about Lucien bleeding out on his father's study floor, about Julia transforming from innocent sister into executioner in the time it took to pull a trigger. He just needed to drive. They made it 15 minutes before the pursuit caught up. Black SUVs appearing in the rear-view mirror, closing the distance with the kind of speed that only came from engines designed for exactly this purpose. The driver saw them too, cursed in Italian, pushed the truck as fast as it would go. "They're going to catch us," he said. "I know. Just get as close to Milan as you can. Every kilometer helps." The SUVs closed in. One pulled alongside, windows down, revealing armed men in suits that cost more than the truck they were pursuing. They didn't shoot, didn't force the truck off the road, just paced them, waiting, probably calling ahead, setting up roadblocks, trapping her in a net she couldn't escape. "Jump," the driver said suddenly. "What?" "We're coming up on a turn. Steep drop on one side, forest on the other. I'll slow down just enough. You jump into the trees. They'll follow the truck. You disappear. They'll kill you." "Maybe, maybe not. But they definitely kill you if you stay. So jump." The turn appeared. The driver tapped the brakes. Serena didn't think, just opened the door and threw herself into darkness. Hit the ground hard. Rolled. Felt something else in her body break. Ribs maybe, or just cartilage that would heal eventually if she survived long enough for healing to matter. She came to rest against a tree trunk, lay there gasping, watching the truck speed away with the SUVs in pursuit. The driver had given her maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. She used them, dragged herself deeper into the forest, found a drainage ditch half filled with autumn leaves and buried herself in them, controlled her breathing, made herself invisible through sheer force of will and desperation. The SUVs returned 3 minutes later, stopped on the road above her hiding spot. Doors opened. Men emerged. Professional. Efficient. The kind of people who hunted humans for a living and were very good at their job. She jumped somewhere in this area. Fan out. Check the tree line. Serena pressed herself flatter into the leaves, felt insects crawling over her skin, ignored them. Survival meant accepting discomfort, meant breathing through her mouth so the sound of her panic wouldn't give her away, meant becoming part of the forest floor and praying the men with guns weren't thorough enough to check every shadow. Footsteps moved through the underbrush. Close. Too close. A flashlight beam swept over her hiding spot, passed on, returned, stopped directly above her. "Got something here?" Serena's hand closed around a rock. Not large enough to be a real weapon, but better than nothing. If they found her, she'd fight, probably lose, but at least she'd make them work for it. The leaves covering her shifted. A hand reached down, grabbed her arm, pulled her up into the flashlight beam. The man holding her was young, early 20s, probably new to this kind of work. His grip was firm but not brutal, professional without the casual cruelty she'd expected. "Found her," he called to the others. 3 more men appeared, surrounded her, weapons drawn but not pointed, like they'd been instructed to retrieve her alive and intact. That was either very good or very bad, depending on what came next. "Signora Moretti, you've caused quite a lot of trouble tonight." The voice came from behind the men. They parted to reveal someone Serena hadn't expected. Not Julia. Not Raphael. Someone else entirely. A woman in her 40s, wearing business attire too expensive for the middle of a forest at 4 in the morning. Dark hair pulled back severe, eyes that had seen violence and responded by becoming harder than the people inflicting it. "Who are you?" Serena asked. "Isabella Conti. I represent certain interests within the Moretti organization, interests that believe this family war has become counterproductive to everyone involved." She gestured to the men. "Take her to the car, carefully. She's worth more alive than dead at the moment." They escorted Serena back to the road, helped her into the back of an SUV that smelled like leather and gun oil. Isabella slid in beside her. The vehicle pulled away, heading not toward the estate but in the opposite direction, toward Milan. "Where are you taking me?" Serena asked. "Somewhere we can talk without being interrupted by Giulia's theatrics or Raffaele's ambitions. Somewhere neutral." Isabella studied her. "You're injured. Ankle, ribs, multiple lacerations. You need medical attention. I need to get this drive to authorities who can actually use it." "The drive Lucien gave you?" "Yes, we know about it. We know everything that happened in that study. Julia made quite a scene afterward, screaming about traitors and legacies. Very dramatic, very unhelpful." "Is Lucien alive?" Isabella's expression didn't change. "That's complicated. Either he's alive or he's not." "He's alive, barely. The first bullet missed anything vital. The second one didn't. He's in surgery now at a private facility we control. Whether he survives depends on factors outside my expertise, but he has a chance, which is more than most people shot twice by family members can say. Relief hit Serena so hard she almost vomited. Lucien was alive, damaged, probably facing months of recovery if he survived the next few hours. But alive. That had to count for something in a night that had been nothing but death and betrayal. "Why are you helping me?" Serena asked. "You work for the Moretti family. I'm running from them with evidence that could destroy them. We're enemies." "We're not enemies. We're both trapped in a system designed to consume anyone who questions it. The difference is, I've spent 20 years learning to work within that system instead of fighting it." Isabella pulled out her phone, showed Serena a photograph. "This is my daughter. She's 16, currently at a boarding school in London, completely unaware that her mother's salary comes from money laundered through shell corporations and paid for with blood. I want her to stay unaware. I want her to have options I never had. And that requires the Moretti family transforming into something legitimate. Something that doesn't require me to help hunt women through forests at 4 in the morning." "So you're on Lucien's side?" "I'm on the side of survival. Lucien represents the best chance this family has at transformation. Raphael represents regression to violence that will eventually attract enough law enforcement attention to destroy us all. And Julia..." Isabella's expression tightened. "Julia is a weapon her father built and pointed at her brother. She doesn't understand what she's become, just knows she's supposed to preserve a legacy that died the moment her father did." The SUV pulled into an underground parking structure. Private, secured. The kind of place that didn't appear on maps and didn't ask questions about blood-stained women arriving in the middle of the night. Isabella led Serena to an elevator. They descended, emerged into what looked like a corporate office repurposed as a war room. Screens covered one wall displaying security feeds from locations across Italy. Financial data scrolled on another wall. In the center, a conference table where 6 people sat waiting, all of them middle-aged, all of them wearing expressions that suggested they'd seen worse nights than this and survived by being smarter than the violence around them. "This is the council," Isabella explained. "Senior executives within Moretti Holdings, who've spent the last decade helping Lucien transition operations from criminal to legitimate. We represent the faction that believes transformation is possible, that this family can evolve beyond its origins, that we don't have to keep building our fortune on corpses." One of the men stood, late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit wrinkled from too many hours awake. "Signora Moretti, I'm Alessandro Rossi. I've been managing Lucien's legitimate real estate operations. I was also your husband's father's attorney before his death. I helped draft the marriage contract that brought you into this family, and I'm deeply sorry for the position that contract has put you in." "You're sorry? That's touching. Does your sorrow come with actual help, or just more corporate language that means nothing?" Alessandro smiled slightly. "Actual help. We want that USB drive. Not to destroy it, to use it, to access the shadow accounts and liquidate them exactly as Lucien planned, to transfer that money into legitimate operations or charitable foundations, to finally sever the connection between the Moretti name and the violence that built it. And if I refuse, if I take this drive to authorities and let them dismantle the empire themselves, then thousands of people lose their jobs. Families that depend on Moretti operations, legitimate and otherwise, find themselves without income. Communities that receive funding through our charitable foundations lose that support. And every criminal organization in Europe that the Moretti family has spent decades keeping in check suddenly finds a power vacuum they'll rush to fill with violence that makes our worst crimes look merciful." Serena looked around the table, saw people who'd made careers out of rationalizing darkness, who'd convinced themselves that managing evil was better than letting it run unchecked, who'd become complicit in horrors they couldn't stop and had decided the best response was to make those horrors slightly less horrible. She'd become one of them. Somewhere between accepting Lucien's marriage contract and fleeing through the forest with stolen secrets, she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, had become complicit, had chosen managed evil over chaotic destruction. The realization should have devastated her. Instead, it just made her tired. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Isabella gestured to a laptop on the conference table. "The drive. We have encryption specialists standing by. Once we access the accounts, we can begin the liquidation process. But we need to move quickly. Raphael knows Lucien had access to this information. He'll be working to freeze the accounts before we can touch them. We have maybe a 6-hour window before he locks us out completely. Serena pulled the USB drive from her pocket, held it up to the light. Such a small thing, barely weighed anything, but it contained the financial architecture of a criminal empire, the proof of generations of crimes, the keys to either transformation or destruction, depending on who controlled it. If I give you this, what happens to Julia? The table went quiet. Isabella and Alessandro exchanged glances. Finally, Alessandro spoke. Julia has committed attempted murder, shot her own brother. Under normal circumstances, we'd turn her over to authorities and let the legal system handle it. But these aren't normal circumstances. She's Lucien's sister, the daughter of a man who commanded absolute loyalty from people who still serve this organization. If we move against her directly, we risk civil war within the family, factions choosing sides, violence that makes tonight look restrained. So she gets away with it. She gets contained, isolated, removed from any position of authority. We're already working to freeze her access to family resources, cut her off from Raphael's support network, make her irrelevant rather than martyring her. Alessandro leaned forward. It's not justice. I know that, but it's survival. And sometimes survival is the best we can manage. Serena set the drive on the table, pushed it toward Isabella. Do it. Access the accounts, liquidate everything. But I have conditions. Name them. First, Elena, my sister. She gets permanent protection, real protection, not threats disguised as security. I want her safe regardless of what happens to me or this family. Done. We'll arrange private security, complete coverage. She'll never know she's being protected, but she will be. Second, my father's debts. They're forgiven, completely. No conditions, no future leverage. He's free. Alessandro nodded. We can make that happen. Third, when Lucien recovers, if he recovers, I want out. I want the marriage annulled. I want my settlement. I want to disappear and never hear the name Moretti again. No negotiations, no extensions. 1 year was the contract. I've earned my freedom. Isabella and Alessandro exchanged another glance. This one longer, more complicated. Finally, Isabella spoke. That's going to be difficult. Why? Because you're pregnant. The words hit like bullets, like the ones Julia had fired. Serena's vision narrowed. Her ears started ringing. The room tilted. What? The medical examination you had 2 weeks ago. Standard testing to ensure there were no complications preventing conception. The results came back 3 days ago. You're approximately 6 weeks pregnant. Lucien was going to tell you tonight. Before everything, Isabella gestured vaguely at the chaos surrounding them. Before this, Serena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her hand went to her stomach automatically, flat, unchanged. Nothing to indicate that something was growing inside her, something that had been conceived. When? That first week after she'd made the alliance with Lucien, after they'd stopped treating each other like strangers and started treating each other like people trapped in the same nightmare. You're lying. We're not. I have the medical reports if you want to see them, but there's no time for processing right now. Raffaele knows about the pregnancy. It's why he moved against Lucien tonight, why he had Julia accelerate her timeline. The heir requirement was about to be fulfilled naturally, which would have secured Lucien's position permanently. Raphael couldn't allow that. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Raphael hadn't been trying to kill Lucien. He'd been trying to kill Serena, eliminate her before she could carry the pregnancy to term. Julia had shot Lucien because he'd gotten in the way. Collateral damage in an assassination attempt that had failed only because Lucien had been willing to die protecting the woman carrying his child. I need to see him, Serena said. Now, take me to wherever he's recovering. I need to... She didn't know what she needed. Just knew that Lucien was alive and she was pregnant, and the world had shifted into a configuration she didn't recognize. You can't see him yet, Alessandro said gently. He's still in surgery. Critical condition. The doctors are optimistic but cautious. Best case scenario, he'll be in recovery for weeks. Worst case, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. So what do I do? You let us handle the financial operations. You rest. You let our medical team examine you to make sure the pregnancy is viable after everything you've been through tonight. And you prepare for the fact that if Lucien doesn't survive, you're carrying the only Moretti heir, which makes you the most valuable person in this entire organization. Or the biggest target? Both, Isabella said, which is why we're moving you to a secure location, somewhere Raphael can't reach, somewhere you can recover and decide what happens next. You've earned that much, a chance to breathe before the next crisis hits. They gave her a room 3 floors underground, medical equipment, a bed that was somehow more comfortable than the one at the estate despite being in what was essentially a bunker. A doctor examined her, confirmed the pregnancy, confirmed the injuries weren't severe enough to threaten it, gave her pain medication and instructions to rest that she had no intention of following, alone. Finally, Serena lay in the dark and tried to process everything that had collapsed in the span of 6 hours. Lucien had been shot. Julia had betrayed them both. The empire was tearing itself apart, and inside Serena's body, something was growing that would either save the Moretti family or destroy what was left of it. She'd come into this marriage as property, had evolved into a spy, had become an ally, and now she was carrying the heir that the entire contract had been designed to produce. Except she'd never intended to actually get pregnant, had planned to survive the year through careful timing and medical intervention if necessary, had assumed she'd walk away free and childless and done with the Moretti family forever. The universe had other plans. Her hand rested on her stomach, still flat, still showing no signs of the life taking root inside. She tried to feel something, maternal instinct, connection, anything that would make this feel real instead of like another trap designed to keep her imprisoned in a life she'd never chosen. Nothing came. Just exhaustion and pain and the echo of gunshots that wouldn't stop playing in her head. Sleep found her eventually, shallow and troubled, filled with dreams of Lucien bleeding out, of Julia's cold eyes sighting down a barrel, of her father's face when he'd signed the contracts that sold her, of Elena laughing in Switzerland, unaware that her sister was pregnant with a criminal heir and trapped in a war that had no good endings. She woke to Isabella shaking her shoulder. The older woman looked worse than before, exhausted, frightened in a way that suggested something had gone catastrophically wrong. "What happened?" Serena asked. "Raphael made his move. He's frozen the shadow accounts, all of them, changed access codes, rerouted the money through new shell corporations we can't track. Everything on that USB drive, it's useless now. He locked us out before we could liquidate a single euro. How is that possible? We had the drive, the access codes, everything." He had a contingency. Someone inside our operation, one of the council members was reporting to him the whole time, told him about our plans, gave him enough warning to secure the accounts. Isabella's hands were shaking. "We're back where we started. Except now Lucien is critically wounded, you're pregnant, and Raffaele knows we tried to undermine him. He's going to retaliate, and we don't have the resources to stop him." Serena sat up, ignored the pain in her ribs. "Who was the traitor?" "Alessandro. He's already fled, probably in Switzerland by now, with a payment from Raffaele that will keep him comfortable for the rest of his life. The man who'd apologized for her marriage contract, who'd promised to help, who'd sat across the conference table looking sympathetic and concerned while planning their destruction the entire time." Serena wanted to scream, wanted to break something, wanted to do anything except accept that they'd been betrayed again by someone they'd trusted. "What about Lucien? He survived surgery. He's stable, but he won't be conscious for days, and even when he wakes up, he'll be too weak to fight. We're on our own. Then we fight without him." "With what?" "Raphael controls the money, controls the loyal soldiers, controls everything that matters. We're executives and accountants. We don't know how to wage war." "Then we learn." Serena stood, tested her weight on her injured ankle. It held, barely. "Raphael thinks he's won. Thinks killing Lucien and securing the accounts gives him total control, but he's forgotten something." "What?" "I'm still alive, and I'm carrying the heir he needs to legitimize his takeover. He can't kill me without destroying the entire purpose of this war, which means I have leverage, and leverage is power if you're willing to use it." Isabella stared at her. "You want to negotiate with the man who just tried to have you killed. I want to make him think I'm negotiating, while actually setting up his destruction. Raphael is old school. He thinks women are tools, assets to be managed. He won't see me coming because he's already dismissed me as irrelevant. That's his weakness, and I'm going to exploit it until there's nothing left of him but regret. That's insane. That's survival. You said it yourself. The only way to win in this system is to work within it. So I'm going to work within it. I'm going to become exactly what Raffaele thinks I am. A pregnant widow-to-be who just wants safety for her child. I'm going to make him believe I've accepted his authority, and then I'm going to burn him down from the inside. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, made a call, spoke rapidly in Italian, hung up. I just arranged a meeting. You and Raphael. Neutral location. Tomorrow morning. He thinks you're coming to surrender, to beg for protection for yourself and the baby. And what am I actually doing? Buying time. Gathering intelligence. Finding his weakness before he finds ours. Isabella's expression hardened. But you need to understand something. If this fails, if Raphael sees through the deception, he will kill you and cut the baby out. Raise it himself as a weapon against everything Lucien tried to build. You're gambling with more than your own life. I know. Serena touched her stomach again. Still nothing. No connection. No maternal bond. Just a tactical consideration. A piece on a board. But right now that baby is the only thing keeping me alive. So I'm going to use it. The same way Raphael would. The same way Lucien's father would have. I'm going to become the monster this family needs. And when it's over, maybe I'll remember what it felt like to be human. The meeting happened in a warehouse overlooking the Milan port. Neutral ground. No weapons allowed except the ones you couldn't see. Raffaele arrived with 10 men who were definitely armed despite the rules. Serena arrived with Isabella and 2 bodyguards who looked ready for violence but prayed it wouldn't come. Raphael looked older up close. 60s but well-maintained. The kind of aging that came from money and medical intervention. He smiled when he saw Serena. Warm. Almost grandfatherly. Like he hadn't ordered her execution 12 hours ago. Serena, I'm so glad you agreed to meet. These last few days have been tragic for everyone involved. I want you to know I take no pleasure in what happened to Lucien. He's my nephew. I love him despite our disagreements, but family sometimes requires difficult choices. Difficult choices. Is that what you call having your niece shoot her brother twice? Julia acted independently. I've already disciplined her for exceeding her authority. She's been removed from any operational capacity until she learns proper restraint. Raffaele gestured to chairs arranged in the center of the warehouse. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. They sat. Isabella stayed standing. Bodyguards formed a perimeter. Raphael's men mirrored the formation, everyone pretending this was a negotiation instead of a confrontation that could turn lethal in seconds. I understand you're pregnant, Raphael said. Congratulations. The heir requirement will be fulfilled after all, though not quite in the manner Lucien envisioned. What do you want? Serena asked. Cooperation. You carry a Moretti heir. That child deserves to grow up in a family with actual power, not the neutered corporate fantasy Lucien was building. I'm offering you protection, resources, a future where your child inherits an empire instead of a bankrupt shell corporation. In exchange for what? Your compliance. You remain pregnant, deliver the child, raise it according to Moretti traditions. In return, I forgive your father's debts, ensure your sister's safety, and provide you with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You'll be a widow. Lucien's injuries are severe, his prognosis uncertain, but a wealthy widow with a powerful son or daughter. That's better than most women in your position could hope for. You're assuming Lucien dies. I'm preparing for likely outcomes, but even if he survives, he'll be too damaged to lead. The organization needs strength, decisiveness, qualities he's never possessed. I'll be assuming control permanently. Your cooperation simply makes that transition smoother. Serena leaned back in her chair. Let silence stretch. Let Raphael think she was actually considering his offer instead of cataloging every detail of his security, his positioning, his tells. Finally, she spoke. I have a counteroffer. Raphael's smile thinned. I'm listening. You want this baby because it legitimizes your takeover, proves the Moretti line continues under your guidance. But you don't actually need me. You just need the child, which means the moment I deliver, I become expendable. So here's what's going to happen instead. I keep the baby. I raise it. And you stay the hell away from both of us. In exchange, I don't go to authorities with evidence of every crime you've committed in the last 40 years. What evidence? Serena pulled out her phone, showed him photographs she'd taken of documents in Lucien's office, financial records, communications, proof of murders and money laundering, and enough criminal activity to put Raphael away for multiple lifetimes. Lucien wasn't the only one documenting your betrayals. I've spent weeks building a case. If anything happens to me, it all goes to Interpol, the Italian police, and every major news organization in Europe. You'll spend whatever's left of your life in prison, and the Moretti empire will collapse under the weight of investigations you can't buy your way out of. Raphael's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went dead, cold. You're bluffing. Try me. I could have you killed right now. Take that phone. Destroy the evidence. The evidence isn't on the phone. It's in multiple secure locations with instructions to release if I don't check in every 12 hours. Kill me and you destroy yourself. Serena stood. So here's how this actually works. You leave me alone. You leave Lucien alone. You take your criminal empire and you fade into whatever retirement looks like for men who've built fortunes on corpses. And in exchange, I don't burn everything you've ever built to the ground. That's the deal. Take it, or spend your final years watching everything collapse. The silence that followed felt infinite. Raphael stared at her with an expression that had probably preceded a lot of executions. Then, slowly, he started laughing. Not humor, just recognition of how completely he'd been outplayed. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Neither are you. I expected a monster. Got a tired old man trying to hold on to relevance in a world that's moved past him. Careful, Kara. This tired old man still has enough power to make you disappear. Then do it. Pull the trigger, start the war, see how it ends for you. Serena walked toward the warehouse exit. Isabella and the bodyguards moved with her. You have until tomorrow to decide. Accept my terms or face the consequences. Your choice. She made it to the door before Raphael spoke again. The baby. Is it really Lucien's? Serena turned back. Does it matter? It matters if you're planning to use my nephew's child as a weapon against me. I'm planning to use everything as a weapon against you, the baby, the evidence, my survival, everything you tried to take from me. Because you made a mistake, Raphael. You thought I was property, thought I'd accept my place in whatever hierarchy you'd established. But property doesn't fight back. People do. And I'm done being anything except the person who destroys you. She left before he could respond. Walked out of the warehouse into morning sunlight that felt wrong. Too bright, too normal. Like the world hadn't just shifted into a configuration where she was threatening a man who'd killed hundreds of people and somehow expecting to survive it. In the car, Isabella was shaking. That was either brilliant or suicidal. Both, probably. Serena's hands were trembling despite her best efforts at control. Did you get everything? Isabella held up her phone. Every word, recorded and already uploaded to secure servers. If Raphael tries anything, this conversation proves premeditation. Good. Now get me to Lucien. I need to see him before... Before what? Before Raphael called her bluff? Before the pregnancy became real instead of just tactical leverage? Before she lost whatever was left of her humanity in this endless war? Just get me to him. The facility where they were treating Lucien looked like a private hospital. Probably was. The kind of place rich criminals went when they needed medical care without questions or police reports. Isabella led Serena through secure corridors to a private room on the 4th floor. Lucien lay in the bed surrounded by machines monitoring every vital function. Tubes, wires, the mechanical apparatus of keeping someone alive when their body wanted to quit. His face was gray, his breathing shallow, but his chest kept rising, kept falling, proof that he was still fighting even though fighting had nearly killed him. Serena sat in the chair beside his bed, took his hand. It was cold, unresponsive. She'd never held his hand except during their wedding ceremony, and that had been pure performance. This felt different, more honest. Like touching him while he couldn't perform back revealed something neither of them had been willing to acknowledge. I'm pregnant, she told him. Wasn't sure if he could hear. Didn't matter. Just needed to say it out loud to someone who might actually understand what it meant. 6 weeks. Due in about 8 months. The heir you needed. The contract fulfilled. Except now you're here and Julia shot you, and your uncle is trying to kill me, and I have no idea what I'm doing except trying to survive one more day. His hand didn't squeeze back, didn't respond, just lay in hers, limp and cold. I threatened Raphael. Told him I had evidence that would destroy him if he came after us. I don't know if he believed me, don't know if I even believe me, but it bought us time. Maybe enough to figure out how to actually win this instead of just postponing the inevitable. She paused. Listened to the machines, to the proof of life continuing despite overwhelming opposition. Your sister tried to kill you. Did you know she was working for Raffaele the whole time? Did you suspect, or were you genuinely blind to what she'd become? Serena's throat tightened. I had a sister too, still do, Elena. She's safe right now, protected. But I'm terrified that someday she'll end up like Julia, corrupted by systems she didn't build, becoming a weapon against people she's supposed to love. I need to stop that. Need to burn this empire down so thoroughly that there's nothing left to corrupt her. The door opened. Isabella entered with a doctor. They conferred quietly. The doctor checked monitors, made notes, left without speaking to Serena. Isabella approached the bed. His vitals are improving. The doctors think he'll wake up within 48 hours. Whether he'll have full cognitive function is still uncertain. The second bullet did significant damage. There might be complications. What kind of complications? Memory loss, motor control issues, personality changes. Brain injuries are unpredictable. Best case, he wakes up mostly himself. Worst case, she didn't finish. Tell me. Worst case, he wakes up unable to remember who he is, who you are, why any of this matters. He could be a stranger to himself, and we'd be fighting a war to protect someone who doesn't understand what's being fought for. Serena looked at Lucien's unconscious face, tried to imagine him waking up empty, blank. All that tortured complexity erased by a bullet his own sister had fired. It felt wrong. Crueler than death somehow. Death at least had finality. This was just endless uncertainty. We keep fighting anyway, Serena said. Whether he remembers or not. Whether he recovers or not. We finish what he started. Dismantle Raphael. Transform the empire. Give his suffering some kind of meaning even if he can't appreciate it. That's extremely noble. Also probably impossible. Probably. But what's the alternative? Surrender to Raphael? Raise this baby in the same poison system that created Julia? Let another generation grow up thinking violence is currency and family is just another word for transaction? Serena stood. No, I'm done accepting impossible situations. I'm going to create an impossible victory instead. And if I fail, at least I'll fail trying instead of just surviving. She left Lucien's room, left him to recover or not recover in the care of doctors who'd probably seen worse. Found her way back to the bunker where they'd given her a room. Lay down in the dark. Felt the exhaustion of the last 24 hours finally catch up with her. Somewhere above, Raffaele was probably planning his response to her threats. Probably calling associates. Weighing options. Calculating whether killing her was worth the risk of exposure. Making the same cold tactical decisions that had kept him alive and powerful for 40 years. And somewhere inside Serena, a collection of cells was dividing. Growing. Becoming something that would either save this family or be destroyed by it. She'd entered this marriage as property, had become a spy, an ally, a target, and now she was carrying the one thing everyone wanted, the heir that could legitimize Raffaele's takeover or secure Lucien's legacy depending on who controlled it. The question was who would control it, who would control her, who would win the war that had started the moment her father signed contracts selling his daughter to save himself. Serena closed her eyes, felt her heartbeat. The machines monitoring Lucien probably showed similar rhythms. Two people trapped in the same nightmare, fighting to survive, hoping that survival eventually led to something that looked like freedom. Outside her room, she heard footsteps, voices, the sound of people preparing for violence that was coming whether they were ready or not. The climax was building, the confrontation that would either destroy them all or forge something new from the ruins. And Serena was going to be at the center of it, not as property, not as a victim, but as the woman who'd survived everything this family could throw at her, and had decided survival wasn't enough. She wanted victory, wanted Raphael destroyed, wanted Lucien to wake up and see what she'd become in his absence, wanted her child to inherit something other than blood and trauma. And she was willing to sacrifice whatever remained of her humanity to achieve it. The old Serena Vale, the journalism graduate who'd dreamed of exposing corruption from a safe distance, was dead. In her place stood Serena Moretti. And Serena Moretti was about to start a war that would reshape the criminal underworld or die trying. The only question was which would happen first. Raphael's answer came 36 hours later. Not through negotiations or phone calls or any of the civilized methods people used when they still believed in solutions. It came through blood. Isabella woke Serena at 3 in the morning with a face that had aged 10 years in the hours since their last conversation. No words. Just a tablet thrust into Serena's hands showing security footage from the hospital where Lucien was recovering. Armed men, 6 of them, moving through corridors with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Nurses and doctors pressed against walls, hands raised, understanding that cooperation was the only thing standing between them and execution. The men reached Lucien's room. The lead operative checked monitors, confirmed the target was still alive, still vulnerable, then raised his weapon and aimed at the bed where Lucien lay unconscious and unable to defend himself. "Stop the feed," Serena said. Her voice came out steady despite everything inside her screaming. "I don't need to watch this." "You do." Isabella didn't stop the playback. "Because what happens next changes everything." On screen, the operative's finger tightened on the trigger, then froze. His body went rigid. He dropped the weapon, collapsed. The 5 men behind him scattered, weapons raised, searching for the threat they couldn't see. One by one they fell, silent, professional, like invisible hands were reaching out and shutting them down. The camera angle shifted, showed a figure emerging from the shadows of Lucien's room. A woman, early 30s, moving with the kind of controlled violence that came from military training and years of practice. She cleared the room in under 20 seconds, checked pulses, confirmed kills, then disappeared back into the shadows as quickly as she'd appeared. "Who the hell was that?" Serena asked. "Adriana Ferraro, former Italian Special Forces. Now freelance security for clients who can afford the best. Lucien hired her 6 months ago, kept her existence completely off the books. Not even I knew about her until she saved his life tonight." Isabella took back the tablet. "Those men Raphael sent are dead. Adriana made it look like a gas leak. Authorities are already on scene treating it as an accident. No investigation, no questions. Just 6 bodies that will be cremated and forgotten. Lucien hired a bodyguard and never told anyone. He hired insurance. Someone loyal only to him. Someone Raffaele couldn't bribe or threaten or turn. It's the most paranoid thing he's ever done. Also, the smartest." Isabella pulled up new footage. But that was just the opening move. Raffaele didn't send all his resources to the hospital. He sent them everywhere. The screen divided into multiple feeds. The bunker where Serena had been staying, breached. Armed men searching rooms, finding them empty because Isabella had moved Serena hours before based on intelligence they'd intercepted. The council members' homes, raided simultaneously, 3 executives killed in their beds, 2 more taken alive for interrogation that would end badly. The legitimate Moretti Holdings offices seized by men claiming authority from Raffaele. Employees evacuated at gunpoint. "He's not negotiating," Serena said. "He's declaring total war. He's eliminating anyone who could challenge his authority, and he's doing it publicly, sending a message to everyone in the organization that Lucien's faction is finished, that cooperation with us is fatal." Isabella's hands shook as she closed the tablet. "We're losing, badly. Half our allies are dead. The others are in hiding or have already switched sides, and Raphael is moving to consolidate control before we can mount any kind of response." Serena stood, ignored the pain in her ankle that had dulled to a constant ache, ignored the nausea from the pregnancy that hit her in waves, ignored everything except the cold clarity of understanding that passivity meant death. "Where is Giulia?" "Under Raphael's protection. He's keeping her close, using her as a symbol of family unity, proof that the legitimate Moretti heirs support his leadership. Then we take her, remove his symbol, force him to react emotionally instead of strategically." Isabella stared at her. "You want to kidnap Giulia, the woman who shot your husband, who tried to kill you. You want to put her in a position where she could finish what she started. I want leverage, Raphael is winning because he's willing to be more brutal than we are. So we become more brutal. We take what he values and we make him understand that this war costs more than he's willing to pay. That's insane. That's survival. You said it yourself. The only way to win in this system is to work within it. So I'm working within it by becoming exactly the kind of monster Raffaele understands. Serena pulled on clothes that had been provided by people whose names she didn't know. Where is he keeping her? His estate, north of Milan, fortified, secured. Attempting extraction would be suicide. Then we don't extract. We lure her out. Make her think she's coming to finish what she started. That I'm vulnerable. Alone. Easy prey for someone who already tried to kill me once. She won't fall for that. She will. Because underneath all that training and conditioning, Julia is still a 23-year-old woman who believes she's fighting for something righteous. She thinks she's preserving her father's legacy, honoring a promise made to a dying man. That righteousness makes her predictable, and predictability is weakness. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, made a call, spoke in Italian too rapid for Serena to follow, hung up. I just sent word through channels we know Raphael monitors. Information that you've left protective custody, that you're alone and desperate, meeting a contact who can smuggle you out of Italy. The location is a warehouse district east of the city, industrial, isolated, perfect for an ambush. How long until Julia takes the bait? If she's going to move, it'll be within the next few hours. She's impulsive, emotional, exactly the kind of operative who takes risks based on opportunity rather than planning. Isabella's expression darkened. But Serena, you need to understand what you're really doing here. If you confront Julia, one of you will probably die. Maybe both. This isn't strategy. This is vengeance disguised as tactics. And vengeance has a way of consuming everyone it touches. I know. Serena checked the weapon Isabella had given her. A pistol, compact, deadly at close range if you knew what you were doing. She didn't, but desperation was a teacher and she was learning fast. But Lucien is unconscious. You're running out of allies, and I'm the only piece on the board Raphael hasn't neutralized yet. So I'm going to use myself as bait. Draw out his weapon, and either I remove Julia permanently or I die trying. Either outcome serves our purposes. That's the pregnancy talking. Hormones making you reckless. That's survival talking. I've been reckless since the moment I agreed to marry a man I'd never met to save my father from debts I didn't create. This is just the natural evolution of recklessness when you run out of other options. The warehouse district looked exactly like places where bad things happened in movies. Abandoned buildings, broken windows, graffiti in languages Serena couldn't read but understood meant territorial claims by people who valued walls more than human life. Isabella dropped her 3 blocks away, gave her a communication device disguised as an earring, promised backup that Serena knew probably wouldn't arrive in time if things went wrong. Remember, Isabella said before driving away, Julia is trained, you're not. If she gets close, you lose. Keep distance. Use the environment. Survive long enough for us to extract you. And if I can't, then at least make her work for it. Die expensive. That's all anyone in this life can hope for. Encouraging words. Serena walked toward the warehouse she'd been given as a rendezvous point. The building was 4 stories of industrial decay, loading docks, rusted equipment, the kind of place that had probably witnessed 100 crimes and would witness 100 more before someone finally demolished it. She entered through a side door that hung crooked on broken hinges. Inside, darkness broken only by moonlight through holes in the roof. Serena's footsteps echoed on concrete floors covered in debris and broken glass. She found a position with sightlines on the main entrance, checked her weapon, waited. Julia arrived 20 minutes later, alone. Either arrogant enough to think she didn't need backup, or smart enough to know that this confrontation needed to be personal. She moved through the warehouse like she owned it, confident. Weapon drawn but held loosely, scanning corners but not expecting serious resistance. "Serena!" she called out, voice echoing in the empty space. "I know you're here. I can hear you breathing. Come out. Let's finish this like adults instead of playing hide and seek in the dark." Serena stepped into a shaft of moonlight. 50 feet separated them. Close enough to talk. Far enough that even Julia's training wouldn't guarantee a fatal shot. "You tried to kill your brother," Serena said. Shot him twice. Left him bleeding on his father's study floor and you want to talk about finishing things like adults? I did what was necessary to preserve our family legacy. Lucien was destroying everything Papa built, turning us into corporate drones instead of a force that mattered. Someone had to stop him. Someone? You mean Raphael? He told you to kill Lucien and you obeyed like a trained dog. Julia's expression hardened. Raphael showed me the truth. Papa's final wishes. Instructions to protect the empire from Lucien's reforms. To preserve what generations of Morettis built through sacrifice and strength. I'm honoring those wishes. Lucien was betraying them. Your father was a monster who raised you to be his weapon, and you're so brainwashed you think that's love. Don't you dare talk about my father. You didn't know him, didn't understand what he sacrificed to keep this family powerful. He was a great man, a leader, someone worth honoring. He was a murderer. I've seen the photographs, the bodies, the evidence of decades of crimes your father committed. He wasn't great. He was just good at hiding how broken he was. And he broke you in the process. Julia's weapon came up, aimed, steady. Last chance, Serena. Walk away. Leave Italy. Forget the Moretti family exists. I'll convince Raphael to let you go. You can disappear. Raise that baby somewhere safe. Start over. You know about the pregnancy. Everyone knows. It's why Raphael is willing to negotiate. The heir legitimizes his control. But it also makes you valuable enough to spare if you cooperate. So cooperate, walk away. Let the people who actually understand this world handle it. I have a better idea. Serena's hand moved to her own weapon, drew it, aimed back. You put down your gun. Come with me. Let me show you what your precious uncle is really building. The bodies he's left scattered across Italy in the last 48 hours. The people he's killed to consolidate power. Then you tell me if that's really the legacy worth preserving. You're bluffing. I'm pregnant, injured, alone in a warehouse with a woman who's already tried to kill me. Do I look like I'm in a position to bluff? Julia's aim wavered. Just slightly, doubt creeping into certainty. Raphael said you'd try to manipulate me, said you'd lie about him to divide our family. I'm not falling for it. Then shoot me. Pull the trigger. Kill the woman carrying your brother's child. Prove you're exactly the monster I think you are. The silence stretched. Moonlight painted them both in shades of gray. Two women holding weapons, both convinced they were right, both understanding that only one would leave this warehouse alive. Julia's finger tightened on the trigger. Serena dove. The gunshot was deafening. The bullet sparked off concrete where Serena had been standing. She rolled, came up behind industrial equipment, returned fire. 3 shots that went wide because fear made her hands shake, and accuracy required calm she didn't possess. Julia advanced, professional, controlled. You can't win this. You're not trained, not prepared. You're just a woman who got sold into a situation you don't understand, playing at being dangerous because you're too stupid to know when you're outmatched. Another shot, this one closer. Serena scrambled deeper into the warehouse, found stairs leading to upper floors, took them 2 at a time despite her ankle-screaming protest. Behind her, Julia followed, methodical, patient. The way predators followed prey they knew couldn't escape. The second floor offered more cover, rusted machinery, support columns, shadows deep enough to hide in if you stayed still. Serena pressed against a column, tried to control her breathing, tried to think instead of just reacting. I know you're scared, Julia called out. Closer now, maybe 30 feet. I know you're pregnant and injured and completely out of your depth, but this doesn't have to end with you dead. Just put down the gun. Come with me. Raphael will protect you if you cooperate. You and the baby. That's more than you deserve after betraying our family. Your family sold me like livestock, Serena shouted back. Reduced me to a breeding contract. Your brother shot twice by his own sister. And you think I betrayed you? You tried to destroy our empire, steal our secrets, undermine everything we built. That's betrayal. I tried to survive. That's not betrayal. That's what people do when monsters try to kill them. Movement. Julia rounding the machinery from the left. Serena shifted right, kept the column between them. Her weapon felt heavy, useless. She'd never killed anyone, never even fired a gun outside this warehouse. And Julia had probably killed dozens. Training and experience versus desperation and fear. The mathematics weren't favorable. You want to know what Papa told me before he died? Julia's voice had changed, softer, almost vulnerable. He said the empire was dying, that Lucien was too weak to preserve it, that I needed to be strong where my brother was soft, that the family's survival depended on me stopping Lucien's reforms before they destroyed us. He made me promise, on his deathbed, made me swear I'd protect the legacy even if it meant going against my own brother. And you believed him, took the word of a dying monster over the evidence of your own eyes. He was my father. He loved me. He used you, turned you into a weapon he could aim at his own son from beyond the grave. That's not love, Julia. That's possession. You don't understand family. You were sold by yours. Mine actually cared about me. Then why are you alone in a warehouse trying to kill a pregnant woman? Why did Raffaele send you instead of coming himself? Because you're not family to him. You're a tool, expendable, useful only as long as you serve his purposes. The words hit something. Serena heard it in the silence that followed, the hesitation, the crack in Julia's certainty. Raphael said you'd try to get in my head, said you'd lie and manipulate because that's what desperate people do, then go back and ask him about the bodies. About Alessandro who betrayed us, then fled to Switzerland. About the council members killed in their homes. About the war he's waging while hiding behind your legitimacy. Ask him and watch him lie to your face. Then tell me which one of us is being manipulated. Footsteps. Closer. Julia was done talking, done negotiating. She came around the column with her weapon raised, and Serena had nowhere left to run. They fired simultaneously. Serena felt the bullet pass so close to her head it left a burn across her cheek. Her own shot went wide but hit a support beam behind Julia. Metal sparked. Ricochet. The deflected bullet caught Julia in the shoulder, spun her around. She dropped her weapon, collapsed against machinery, clutching the wound, staring at Serena with shock that suggested she'd never actually believed she could be hurt. Serena approached, weapon steady now that the impossible had happened. I didn't want this. Didn't want to hurt you. But you didn't give me a choice. Finish it then. Julia's voice came out tight with pain. Kill me. Prove you're just like us. Just another Moretti willing to do whatever it takes to survive. I'm nothing like you. I didn't choose this life. Didn't train for violence. Didn't embrace darkness because someone told me it was legacy. I'm just trying to protect the people I love from people like you. People you love. You don't love Lucien. You barely know him. I know him better than you do. Know he spent 10 years trying to escape the legacy that's destroying you. Know he hired bodyguards to protect himself because he understood his own family would try to kill him. Know he gave me escape routes from the marriage contract because even when he needed me, he wanted me to have freedom. That's more than your father ever did for you. Julia laughed. Wet. Painful. You're carrying his child and you think that makes you understand him, but you don't. You don't know what it's like growing up Moretti. The pressure, the expectations, the understanding that your life isn't yours because it belongs to something bigger. Legacy. Empire. Family name you'll never understand because you weren't born into it. You're right, I wasn't, which means I can see how poisoned it is. How it turns children into weapons and calls that love. How it destroys everyone it touches and calls that strength. Serena lowered her weapon. I'm not going to kill you, Julia, but I'm not saving you either. You made your choices. Now live with them. She turned to leave, made it 3 steps before Julia's voice stopped her. He won't forgive you, Raphael. He'll hunt you forever. You and that baby. He doesn't accept defeat, doesn't allow loose ends. As long as you're alive, you're a threat. And he eliminates threats. Then I'll eliminate him first. With what? You're alone, powerless, pregnant and injured. What are you going to do against a man who's survived 40 years in this life? By being more ruthless than everyone else? Serena looked back, saw Julia clutching her shoulder, saw the certainty cracking in her eyes, saw a woman who'd built her entire identity on lies her father had told her, and was only now beginning to understand how completely she'd been used. I'm going to use the one advantage he doesn't expect. I'm going to tell the truth. About everything. About the Moretti Empire. About the murders and the money laundering and the crimes your family spent generations committing. I'm going to expose all of it to authorities who can't be bought. And when Raffaele's fortress collapses, I'm going to be standing in the ruins watching him realize that brutality doesn't always win. That's suicide. The exposure will destroy everything, including Lucien's legitimate businesses, the jobs, the families that depend on Moretti operations. Then they'll find new jobs, new dependencies, better ones built on foundations that aren't fertilized with corpses. Serena walked toward the stairs. Stay here. Bleed. Think about what your father turned you into. And when you're ready to stop being his weapon, maybe there's a life waiting for you that doesn't require killing your own family. She left Julia in the shadows of the warehouse. Didn't look back. Didn't confirm if the wound was fatal or manageable. Just descended stairs and emerged into night air that tasted like freedom and smoke. Isabella was waiting 3 blocks away. Saw the blood on Serena's clothes. The expression on her face that suggested something fundamental had broken and reformed into something harder. Julia? Isabella asked. Shot. Not fatal unless she's stupid enough to not seek medical attention, but neutralized either way. She won't be operating for Raphael anymore. And you're just leaving her? I'm done saving people who don't want to be saved. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Serena climbed into the car. Take me to Lucien. I need to see him. Need to tell him what I'm about to do before I can't take it back. The drive took 20 minutes through Milan streets that were waking up to another day of pretending the world was normal. Isabella didn't speak, just drove with the grim efficiency of someone who'd run out of comforting words. They reached the hospital where Adriana had defended Lucien from Raphael's assassins. Entered through back corridors secured by people loyal to causes Serena didn't fully understand. Lucien's room was unchanged, machines, tubes, the mechanical preservation of life. But something was different. His eyes were open, conscious, following movement with awareness that suggested he'd crossed back from wherever unconsciousness had taken him. You're awake, Serena said. His mouth moved. No sound. Tried again. This time a whisper that barely qualified his speech. How long? 3 days since Julia shot you. You've been unconscious the entire time. Doctors said you might not wake up, might not remember who you were if you did. She moved closer, took his hand. It was warmer than last time, responsive. Do you remember? Everything. The word came out rough, painful. Julia, the USB drive, you running, everything before I passed out. Then you know about the pregnancy. His eyes found hers, something in them she'd never seen before. Not quite happiness, more like relief mixed with terror. 6 weeks. 7 now, due in about 7.5 months. The air your contract required. Except I didn't plan on actually producing it. I was going to run, disappear before the year ended. But the universe had other plans. I'm sorry. For what? For all of it. The contract, the marriage, dragging you into a war you didn't start, getting shot and leaving you alone to fight battles I should have finished. His hand squeezed hers weakly. You should hate me. You'd be justified. I did hate you. Maybe still do some days, but hate requires energy I don't have left. So instead I'm just trying to survive. And survival means finishing what you started, destroying Raphael, transforming the empire. Making your suffering mean something. Lucien's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they'd changed. Harder. More focused despite the pain and medication. How? By exposing everything. I'm going to take the evidence I have, the documents, the recordings, the proof of crimes your family committed, and I'm going to give it to authorities. Interpol. Italian police. Every agency that has jurisdiction. Let them dismantle the empire piece by piece. Arrest Raffaele. Freeze the assets, destroy the infrastructure that's kept your family powerful for generations. That destroys me too. My legitimate businesses. Everything I built trying to escape my father's legacy. I know. But it's the only way to stop Raphael permanently. He's too entrenched, too connected. The only thing that defeats him is transparency he can't buy his way out of. And that transparency doesn't discriminate. It burns everything touched by Moretti blood. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Machines beeped, monitored vitals that were improving despite everything working against them. Finally, he spoke. Do it. Expose everything. Burn it all down. My father built an empire on suffering. If destroying that empire is the price of stopping Raffaele and protecting you and our child, then it's worth it. You'll lose everything. I'll lose money, power, status, things I never wanted in the first place. But maybe I'll find something worth having instead. A life that doesn't require photographs of corpses on my walls to remember what I'm fighting against. And Julia? She made her choice. Let her face the consequences. I can't save her from herself anymore. Maybe I never could. Maybe my attempts to protect her just enabled the person my father wanted her to become. His eyes found Serena's again. But you, and the baby, you I can still protect, even if it means destroying everything else. Serena leaned down, kissed his forehead. Not romantic, not performative, just honest connection between two people who'd survived impossible circumstances and were trying to figure out what came after survival. I'll need to disappear, she said, after I expose the empire. Raphael will have time before arrests happen. Time to retaliate. I can't be visible, can't be accessible. I'll need to vanish completely until the dust settles. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Somewhere Raphael can't find me. Somewhere I can have this baby without armed men kicking down doors. She paused. You're welcome to join me. When you recover, if you want to. No obligations, no contracts, just two people trying to build something that isn't poisoned by the past. I'd like that. A life without Moretti ghosts, without dead ancestors judging every choice. Just us, figuring out how to be human again. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having is. Serena left him to recover, left the hospital with Isabella, and spent the next 6 hours preparing documents that would destroy the Moretti empire. Financial records, communication intercepts, evidence of murders and money laundering and crimes that spanned decades. She organized everything, verified authenticity, built an airtight case that even corrupt officials couldn't ignore. Then she sent it. Simultaneous uploads to Interpol, Italian authorities, major news organizations across Europe. A data dump so comprehensive that even the most powerful people couldn't suppress it. Within hours, headlines were erupting, prosecutors were mobilizing, arrest warrants were being prepared. The Moretti Empire was collapsing, not with violence, not with dramatic confrontations, just with the slow, inevitable weight of truth finally being acknowledged. Raphael called her phone that evening. Serena almost didn't answer, almost let him rage into voicemail, but curiosity won. She picked up. You've destroyed us. His voice was calm, too calm. The kind of control that preceded explosions. Generations of work, billions in assets, hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on our operations, all of it gone because you couldn't accept your place. My place was never in your empire. I was sold into it. I'm just correcting that mistake. You're naive. You think exposing us changes anything? The system that allowed the Moretti family to operate for decades, that system still exists. Will be replaced within months by organizations worse than us, more violent, less controlled. You haven't saved anyone. You've just created chaos that will consume innocent people. Maybe, but at least they won't be consumed by you. That's progress. Where are you? Where's the child? Somewhere you'll never find us. Somewhere your money and influence don't reach. Somewhere I can raise my baby without worrying about family legacies built on corpses. That child is a Moretti heir. It belongs to this family. That child is a person, not property, not a symbol, not a weapon to be aimed at your enemies, just a person who deserves better than what you're offering. Serena's voice hardened. You're going to prison, Raphael. The evidence is overwhelming. The arrests are already happening. By tomorrow, you'll be in custody facing charges that will keep you locked up for the rest of your life. This conversation is the last power you'll ever have over anyone. I'll find you, however long it takes. However much it costs. I'll find you and that baby, and I'll... Serena hung up, blocked the number, threw the phone in a trash bin 3 blocks away and watched it disappear into garbage that would never be traced. Isabella had already arranged new identities, new passports, transportation to a country Serena had never visited, and Raffaele would never think to search. The next morning, news broke that Raffaele Moretti had been arrested. Footage showed him in handcuffs being led from his estate by police. His expression was blank, defeated. The man who'd spent 40 years building power through fear and violence finally facing consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. Julia was arrested the same day, found in a private clinic where she'd gone for treatment of the gunshot wounds Serena had inflicted. She didn't resist, didn't fight, just surrendered with the empty expression of someone who'd built their entire identity on lies and was only now realizing how completely those lies had failed. The legitimate Moretti businesses entered bankruptcy. Thousands of employees lost jobs. Shareholders lost investments. Communities that had depended on Moretti funding scrambled to find alternatives. The collateral damage was real, significant, exactly what Raphael had predicted. But something else happened too. Investigators uncovered trafficking rings the Moretti family had facilitated, freed victims who'd been trapped for years, exposed corruption networks that had enabled the empire's crimes. Serena's exposure hadn't just destroyed one family, it had illuminated an entire system of exploitation. And that illumination was forcing changes she couldn't have predicted. 6 months later, Serena gave birth in a hospital in New Zealand, a country so far from Italy, it felt like another planet. No family present except Isabella, who'd become something like a friend through shared trauma. No celebration, no announcements, just a quiet arrival of a small human who had no idea about the empire that had been destroyed to protect her existence. Sofia Moretti. 7 pounds. Black hair. Eyes that would probably turn gray like her father's. Perfect. Unmarked by the violence that had preceded her. Lucien arrived 3 days later. He'd spent months in recovery, physical therapy, surgeries to repair damage from bullets his own sister had fired. He walked with a cane now. Would probably always walk with a cane. But he was alive, conscious, present in ways he'd never been before getting shot. He held his daughter for the first time in a hospital room half a world away from the estate where he'd been raised. Cried. Actually cried. Not the controlled emotion Serena had seen glimpses of before, real tears that came from somewhere deep and honest. "She's perfect," he said. "She's ours. That's better than perfect." They didn't get married again. Didn't renew vows or make promises about forever. Just existed together in a small house outside Auckland. Learning how to be parents. Learning how to be people who weren't defined by trauma. Learning that transformation was possible even when it felt impossible. Serena started writing articles about human trafficking, about systems of exploitation that allowed families like the Morettis to operate. Her byline never appeared. But the work got published, got read, made small differences in places she'd never visit. Lucien started teaching economics at a local university, explaining financial structures without mentioning that he'd once controlled one of Europe's largest criminal empires. Students had no idea their professor had witnessed executions before he was old enough to vote, and that anonymity was exactly what he needed. Elena visited 6 months after Sofia's birth. Serena had finally told her sister the truth about the marriage, the contract, the violence that had consumed their father's bad decisions. Elena had cried, had been furious, then had forgiven in the way that sisters forgive when love matters more than anger. Their father never visited. The exposure of the Moretti Empire had included exposure of his crimes. He was serving 15 years in a federal prison in the United States for money laundering and conspiracy. Serena had the power to reduce his sentence, had evidence that could prove he'd been coerced by circumstances. She chose not to use it, chose to let him face consequences he'd earned. Some betrayals didn't deserve forgiveness. 2 years after Sofia's birth, Julia sent a letter. It had been forwarded through so many intermediaries that Serena almost didn't recognize the handwriting. The letter was short, no apologies, no requests for forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "I've had a lot of time to think. Prison does that. Makes you face the person you became when you weren't paying attention. I was my father's weapon. You were right about that. He built me to fight a war that ended the moment he died. But I kept fighting anyway because I didn't know how to be anything else. I'm trying to learn now, trying to understand what I did, why I did it, whether redemption is possible for people like me. The therapist the prison provides says I have complex PTSD, that I was groomed to see violence as love, that my father's abuse was systematic and deliberate. I don't know if that's excuse or explanation, maybe both. Maybe neither. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I shot my brother, tried to kill you, destroyed lives in service of a legacy that was already dead. Those aren't mistakes you apologize for. They're crimes you spend your life trying to understand. But I want you to know, I'm glad you survived. Glad the baby was born healthy. Glad Lucien lived despite my best efforts to kill him. That sounds hollow, self-serving, but it's true. You were right about everything. Papa was a monster. Raphael was worse. and I was too broken to see it until you forced me to. So thank you for showing me the truth, even though it cost you almost everything. G. Serena read the letter 3 times, tried to find the manipulation, the angle, the hidden threat, found nothing except honest acknowledgement from someone who'd finally stopped performing. She wrote back, not forgiveness, not friendship, just acknowledgement that both of them had survived systems designed to destroy them, that they'd both made terrible choices, that maybe understanding was better than forgiveness because understanding didn't require pretending the damage hadn't been real. 3 years after Sophia's birth, investigators closed the final cases against the Moretti empire. Raphael died in prison. Heart attack. Quick. Probably too merciful for what he'd done, but Serena wasn't in charge of cosmic justice, just her own small corner of existence. The estate in Sicily was sold, became a museum about organized crime. Tourists walked through halls where Serena had been imprisoned, looked at artifacts from the Moretti family's criminal past, took photographs, left without understanding that real people had suffered inside those walls. Caterina retired to a small village in Tuscany, sent Christmas cards every year, never mentioned the Moretti family except in vague terms that suggested she'd seen too much to ever speak freely. Serena sent cards back, kept the connection alive because Caterina had been kind when kindness was rare. Isabella married a prosecutor she'd met during the investigation, had a daughter, named her Serena, which felt like too much honor for someone who'd just survived instead of triumphed. But Isabella insisted. You didn't just survive, she said during a video call 3 continents apart. You transformed, became the person who ended a cycle of violence that had consumed generations. That's worth honoring. On Sophia's 5th birthday, Lucien asked Serena a question he'd been avoiding for years. Do you regret it? Any of it? The marriage? The violence? The choices that brought us here? They were sitting on a beach watching Sophia build sandcastles that the tide would eventually destroy. The ocean was indifferent to human suffering, always had been, always would be. Serena found that comforting somehow. I regret the system that made those choices necessary. Regret my father's weakness. Regret your father's cruelty. Regret everything that had to break before anything could heal. She looked at him. Gray eyes that had seen too much but were learning to see beauty again. But I don't regret you, or her, or the life we built from the ruins. That part, the surviving and transforming part, that I'd do again. Even knowing what it would cost? Especially knowing what it would cost. Because the alternative was staying property, staying trapped, staying silent while monsters made decisions about my life. And I'd rather fight monsters than become one. Sophia ran up to them, sand in her hair, joy on her face, no idea that she'd been born into a war that had nearly killed everyone who loved her. And maybe that was the victory. Not that the war had been won, just that it hadn't consumed the next generation. Mama, can we stay until sunset? We can stay as long as you want. They stayed until the sun painted the ocean colors that felt impossible, until the tide came in and erased the sandcastles, until Sophia fell asleep against Serena's shoulder and Lucien carried her back to the car with the careful movements of someone whose body still remembered bullets. That night, after Sophia was asleep and the house was quiet, Serena stood at the window looking at stars that didn't care about human drama, felt the weight of everything she'd survived, everything she'd lost, everything she'd gained. She'd been sold like livestock, had become a spy, an ally, a target, a mother, a survivor. Not in that order, not cleanly, just messily and painfully and with enough scar tissue to prove she'd fought for every breath. The Moretti Empire was gone, destroyed by the woman it had tried to own. That had to count for something in a world that usually let monsters win. Lucien joined her at the window, put his arm around her waist. They stood together in silence, watching a world that had finally stopped trying to kill them. Do you think she'll ask about the family someday? He asked. About where she comes from? Probably. Kids always do eventually. What will you tell her? The truth. That she comes from darkness but doesn't belong to it. That her family built terrible things but she doesn't have to preserve them. That legacy is just another word for choice, and she gets to choose what hers means. That's a good answer. It's an honest one. That's all I have left. They went to bed. Not in separate wings of an estate built on blood. Just in a small room, in a small house, in a country that didn't know their names or care about their past. And somehow, that anonymity felt more valuable than all the power and wealth the Moretti family had spent generations accumulating. Because power bought compliance, wealth bought comfort, but anonymity bought freedom. And freedom was the only thing that had ever really mattered. Years later, 10, 15, maybe more, Sophia would ask about the scars on her mother's ankle, about the faint burn across her cheek, about the way her father walked with a cane and sometimes woke screaming from nightmares he couldn't explain. And Serena would tell her daughter the truth, about a contract that sold her, about an empire built on corpses, about a man trying to escape his father's legacy and a woman trying to survive hers, about violence and transformation and the cost of becoming something other than what the world expected, about the baby who was supposed to be a transaction but became a reason to fight instead of surrender. And Sophia would listen, would process, would ask the question every child eventually asks their parents. Was it worth it? And Serena would answer honestly. Every scar, every nightmare, every moment of terror and pain and impossible choice, all of it was worth it. Because the alternative was a world where you didn't exist, and I'd burn down 1,000 empires before I'd accept that alternative. That was the truth. Messy, complicated, stained with blood and compromise and choices no one should have had to make. But true. And truth was the only inheritance worth leaving, the only legacy that mattered, the only thing that survived when empires fell and monsters died and the world kept turning despite human suffering. Serena had entered her marriage as property. She left it as a person who'd destroyed an empire to protect her daughter's freedom. That transformation from commodity to catalyst was the real story, the real victory, the real ending to a nightmare that had started with a contract and ended with a child who would never sign one. And in the quiet hours when the world was sleeping and the past felt too heavy to carry alone, Serena would remember Lucien's gray eyes the first time she'd met him, cold and distant and already mourning the person he'd have to become. Would remember Julia's face before she pulled the trigger, convinced she was right, convinced she was honoring her father. Would remember Raffaele's voice on the phone, promising vengeance, promising consequences, delivering nothing except a prison cell and an unmarked grave. Would remember her own face in the mirror the morning after her wedding, barely recognizing the woman looking back, understanding she'd been sold, but not yet understanding she could buy herself back. All of it memory now. All of it survived. All of it transformed into something that didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. The scars remained, would always remain. But scars were just proof you'd fought. And Serena had fought. God, how she'd fought. And won. Not perfectly, not cleanly, not without cost. But won. And that was enough.